Want me to kick it off?
Good morning, and welcome to the South Florida Water Management District Sea Level Rise and Flood Resiliency Plan Workshop. My name is Yvette Bonilla. We're excited that you could join us today. We encourage everyone to contribute to this discussion. For technical questions, in-person members of the public who wish to ask a technical question during the Q&A, agenda items 5, 8, and 11 must fill out a card, section 5, and give to a meeting attendant. Members of the public participating by Zoom who wish to ask a technical question during Q&A, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom or use the raise hand feature. If you are using a phone, please press *9 to raise hand and *6 to mute and unmute. Public comment will be taken during the public comment session, agenda item 12. During public comment, in-person members of the public who wish to comment, please complete a card, section 6, and give to a meeting attendant. Members of the public on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature. If you are having trouble with Zoom and need help, please go to the website at sfwmd.gov and click the Ask Us button on the top of the page. Now, I'd like to pass the mic to our Executive Director, Drew Bartlett.
Thank you, Yvette, and welcome everybody to the first workshop for our 2022 District Resiliency Plan for sea level rise and flood protection. This is our second year doing this effort. The first year was a great learning experience that was really led by Dr. Carolina Moran, our District Resiliency Officer, who's got an incredible team. For those of you in the audience, you can see him up here at the front of the room. And thank you for those participating in Zoom as well. This plan is critically important for the Water Management District, so public participation is vital. We are open to any and all comments. We want to hear from everybody on their thoughts on this this sea level rise and flood resiliency plan for the Water Management District. Our ears are open. We have incredible technical staff. For those of you that have participated in our metrics workshops and our science-oriented workshops, you understand the value that we bring to South Florida and the information that we're bringing to the table as we plan for our future in South Florida. But it all culminates in this plan that we want to put together this summer. Ultimately, it will come together in the fall so we can submit it to the state for their inclusion in the statewide resiliency plan. So we want engagement from all members, all partners, whether it's local government, whether it's just interested stakeholders or non-government organizations. We're certainly open to hear from you. As you know, it's a challenge for the Water Management District going forward. We've been observing the effects of sea level rise for some time right now. This is going to be an expensive endeavor to make sure that we can provide a level of service into the future, whether it's water supply or flood control, or just ecosystem restoration. As you know, this board is committed to ecosystem restoration, which is a key component in resiliency in South Florida. You might think of Everglades restoration as the biggest resiliency project in the state because it does help us with water supply, with saltwater intrusion, with carbon sequestration, whatever you want to call it. It is an incredible component for the future of the South Florida Water Management District. But we've got a lot to talk about, and I really appreciate everyone joining us today, whether you're here in person or online. And I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Carolina Moran to take you through the session. She's been doing an incredible job for the district. She has relentless energy, darkens my door frequently with the next thing on her mind, and I really appreciate it. So Dr. Carolina Moran, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks everyone for being here. And I really appreciate also the opportunity, the mention that Drew just did for the whole team that is working together to put this plan together. This was a big team effort with the district resiliency team, but also literally all the internal teams in this agency that are bringing information to us. And we are trying to navigate in terms of what are the priorities, how we should be tackling this. And this is really the objective of what we are going to be doing here today, presenting the plan, setting up a path for how we want to be addressing those resiliency needs as an agency. And We always start with this slide, as this is really the foundation for the creation of this agency, and really brings us to what we want to be bringing in terms of resiliency, how we want to be addressing resiliency today. So water management was, since early 20s is when we as a state started like building canals, drainage systems to allow us to develop, to allow agriculture to occur, to allow the activities that we do today in Florida. And of course, more than 70 years pass, and we have a system that now has significant influences. And we still need to manage the system. We need to understand what are the current limitations, how we need to make enhancements, how we need to be operating this system under the current conditions, also under the future conditions. And these two images help just to explain this effort of managing a water management system that was built 7 years ago, that is going to change conditions, and that we still need to provide our mission as an agency. So the top left picture here shows the importance of managing water for the ecosystem, for the ecological functions, for restoring some of the existing functions that we have in the region. A huge portion of our work in South Florida is ecosystem restoration. And of course, we are looking at those conditions today, those conditions in the future, and how does that affect the work that we do to maintain those valuable ecosystem services maximized in our entire region. On the top right here, we see how we manage water then in the urban developed systems, which is a very tiny balance that we have to do there in terms of providing flood protection to those communities. So really allowing our drainage system to work and drain water out of the occupied spaces, out of the agricultural areas, so we can develop and we can live in those areas. And at the same time, protecting all the water supply sources that we have. Our groundwater source is coming from our very shallow aquifer that sits really close underneath the region that we live. And we need to be able to maintain fresh water heads in our system the entire time, especially during the dry season, for us to do not limit the amount of water that we have today available for water supply. So that's really the balance. And when we are talking about changing conditions, this is exactly, we're going to have to be able to, in more extreme wet conditions, store more water, drain more water, and do not impact the community and the environment. And in the dry season, we need to find the water to maintain our fresh water heads in the system to avoid saltwater intrusion and all the other impacts to water resources and the environment in general. We are recognizing, I mentioned, those change conditions. Here is just a summary pointing to the change, the development as a whole, how we are building the canals in the system, areas that were planned to be agricultural, so meaning we would have a different infiltration and a different capacity to store and manage water, but are now fully occupied, fully urbanized. And again, a huge increase of population that is also impacting the way the system works today. We are tracking also changing conditions in terms of climate change conditions, understanding the climate, of course, the water cycle. It's a big piece of what we do in terms of water management, and we need to understand what's happening now and what are the conditions in the future. So here we have a hub. Drew mentioned in his opening remarks that we are doing science and data analysis to understand, to see where we are observing changing conditions. We are documenting that. We are posting everything in this hub. It's a user-friendly tool that we have the maps, the story maps, data, access to data. So it's a bridge between how we interpret the data and also linking you to the raw data. So we are bringing right now full automation to this hub. So any data that has been used to produce those maps can be easily accessed by any user. So again, with the goal of informing, understanding what's happening in our region, sharing with our partners, and all of us taking action to build resilience in the system. This video here shows how we are already seeing limitations in our current operations. So our system is already facing critical conditions, limitations in the way we operate. This gate here is overtopped by sea level. So it was designed with the purpose of not allowing salt water to move inland, I mentioned the protection of our water sources, our well fields. And what we see in this picture, in this video here, is about 2 years ago, during a high tide event, the sea level was so high that it overtopped the gate that was designed and built to protect, to avoid the saltwater intrusion, to maintain the saltwater in the ocean side. So again, with with increasing sea levels and conditions like that occurring, we are reducing our discharge capacity, and we really account for that as increasing flooding risks to our communities. And this is what we are being discussing here today, and what are the plans and actions that we are beginning to do in order to address those conditions. I'm not going to go in detail about all the work that we do. I know we're going to have our bureau chiefs also presenting here today, but we have been looking not only on those observed conditions where we are seeing flood, how they're occurring, what are the impacts. This map here shows model results. So we have advanced modeling tools that we run to be able to assess the impacts and plan for the solutions. So in this map here is a quick illustration of one of the adaptation. So the benefits of one of the adaptation solutions that we are thinking about, that we're going to be discussing today. But here we show that one proposed measure can have reduced flooding risks, meaning reduce overland flow in an entire basin area. So we're going to be, of course, detailing all of those proposals here today. We are also assessing economic benefits associated with that. Of course, we need to look at cost benefits from all of our strategies. And again, mapping all of those conditions here in South Florida. And today, we are then launching our Year 2 2022 draft plan. We are really opening for public comments today. This is a draft document. It's already available in our website. We're going to be sending links later today for you all to have quick access to this draft document. And I'm just going to introduce you briefly to what is the vision that we have for this plan. So we talk about risks, and we are focused on reducing those risks to the communities, to the environment. So reducing flooding risks, protecting water supplies, and continue protecting the environment. We are looking at what are the implementation resources available for us to move forward with those projects. We are looking, of course, to the anticipated future conditions, so planning those projects for today's and for the future. Looking at the population, so vulnerable population and critical infrastructure that is impacted by those risks, so trying to maximize the risk reduction that we have, but looking at the communities, the critical infrastructure that is impacted by those conditions. Leveraging partnerships and public engagement. This is a big piece of what we need to do. We are not going to be able to move forward alone. We depend on partnerships. We are working very closely with local governments, with the state at the federal level. So this is a big piece of the work that we are doing. We are capturing this ongoing ecosystem restoration efforts. We're going to talk about this today. We have been building resilience to our system for years, for more than 20 years today, and we're going to be talking about that too, how our ecosystem restoration efforts are already bringing resilience to the region. We're going to talk a little bit about our vision, and what we're going to talk also include the need for us to evolve in the way we plan for innovative green and nature-based solutions. This is a part of what we need to build in South Florida to build resiliency. And then also we're going to bring our discussions about how can we offset energy demands, especially the new energy demands. Our system will depend on additional elements, pumps, new energy demands, and we are looking at what are the sustainable sources that we are going to be using for those increasing energy demands. The goal of this plan, here just to summarize, because before we get into the details on what we're going to be doing, is really to reduce the risks of flooding, sea level rise, and other climate impacts on water resources, and increasing community and ecosystem resiliency in South Florida. This is aligned with our mission, and we are working really closely with our partners to move forward on that. With that, I will invite Dave to come join us and give some details about what we have in the 2022 update plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolina. So as Carolina mentioned, our resiliency vision feeds into everything else that's in our plan. And today I'm going to be going over our resiliency plan for 2022. The plan has 9 chapters. The first describes our vision. The second chapter is about our flood protection level of service program, which is the modeling program that basically gets us our projects. So the modeling shows us where there are vulnerabilities in the system and comes up with ways to deal with those vulnerabilities. Chapter 3, as Carolina mentioned, we're looking for using additional renewable energy sources in order to offset new energy costs, like for forward pumps and things like that. Nature-based solutions, we're focusing, we have a whole chapter on nature-based solutions this year, new content. We want to focus more on nature-based solutions and have them incorporated into all of our projects when we can. We'll also have Cassandra Armstrong speaking about ecosystem restoration and resiliency and all the work that the district has already done and has been doing for many years to restore our ecosystems, and that's a big part of resiliency. We'll have a speaker, Mark Elsner, on water supply resiliency, which is also a new chapter in our plan. And finally, we'll talk about characterizing and ranking resiliency projects and how we do that. And then I'll go over our priority cost estimates for the projects that come out of the flood protection level of service program. So that's the meat on the bones is the priority projects. And then finally, the additional studies with our planning projects that help to feed all the different parts of our resiliency program. I just wanted to mention that last year, the 2021 plan, we put that out for public comments, and we received comments from 29 individual entities, including local government, districts, NGOs, private companies, universities, and private individuals. So we have quite a bit of input from the public, and we took all that into consideration for the 2022 year plan. So I'm going to be focusing on the new content first here. And the chapter 3 is new energy efficiency and renewable energy. And as Carolina mentioned earlier, what we're looking to do is to add renewable energy sources in order to offset new energy demands that we're going to have with our projects. Some of the things that we're already doing, automating pump stations that cuts down on maintenance and the need for personnel to be on site all the time. We're designing our projects for longer lifespans that also cuts down on maintenance, diversifying our fleet with electric vehicles over time. And the district's already following Florida Building Code energy efficiency requirements, and also continuing to follow LEED and Envision program recommendations, which are also energy efficiency programs. So we have a few concepts that we're working on with FP&L, and we'll hear from Jennifer Schaefer from FP&L later on, but we're talking about possibly adding solar arrays at the C43 and C44 reservoir projects in order to try to offset some of the pumping, the energy costs for pumping there. A solar canopy possibly at headquarters, and another pilot project where we could possibly put floating solar panels at headquarters as a proof of concept. That project would have 590 solar panels, and the estimated annual production would be enough to power about 50 houses for 1 year. So even though it's a pilot project, it's a meaningful amount of energy that would be produced. Chapter 4 on nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are project features that use or mimic natural processes to maximize benefits. I'm going to be presenting a process for evaluating nature-based solutions and whether they should go into our projects or not. Performance metrics that we use to evaluate them, and some examples of nature-based solutions for projects, as well as a project recommendation that we have for this year for the C8 Basin Resiliency Project. So nature-based solutions, what are they? Things like living shorelines, riparian buffers, wetlands and mangrove restoration and preservation, adding permeable surfaces to our projects, artificial reefs, green and blue streets, and stormwater detention areas. They're all nature-based solutions, and there's many others. The process that we're using in our program to evaluate nature-based solutions and whether they can fit into our projects. First thing we do is identify the problem or opportunity, and then we try to design a nature-based solution that we can implement to augment the project. We need to engage partners early because a lot of the nature-based solutions that we want to implement aren't necessarily on district lands. So we'll be working with multiple agencies, counties, cities, et cetera, in order to get them to buy in and partner with us on these projects. Next is to implement the actual nature-based solution, be it a living shoreline or something else. And it's important to be able to monitor the benefits and make sure that what we're doing is actually making a difference. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And then if we do have a nature-based solution in a project and it's working really well, we want to be able to transfer and upscale that to the rest of the basin, into the region. So the things that we want to measure, we want to be slowing the flow and letting it grow, which those are two things that we can measure. We can measure peak discharge, and if the nature-based solution actually slows the flow. And then filtering pollutants, letting riparian buffers grow and using stormwater detention areas and things like that. We're decreasing the amount of pollutants in the water. Those are things we can measure as well. Measuring flood risk reduction, bank stability, and then some of the water quality metrics that we look at: salinity, turbidity, chlorophyll A, and others. And then the project example that we wanted to present today, the C8 Basin Resiliency Project, and this is a project that we have applied for FEMA funding for. And the project goals are to reduce flood risk due to sea level rise, restore the S28 structured discharge capacity to its original design. It's no longer operating at its original design capacity because of sea level rise. We want to restore the basin's flood protection level of service to original design and associate green infrastructure solutions in this project in order to enhance the quality of life in the region. So a little bit about the C8 Basin, population of about 270,000 people, 19% of which are financially disadvantaged. It's about 28 square miles, and it's fully developed residential and commercial, so not a lot of room to build in this basin. Critical assets that are within the basin include fire stations, schools, utilities, medical facilities, and other things like that that are important to protect. So this is a conceptual plan showing some of our solutions for the C8 Basin resiliency. And the biggest thing is an enhanced structure at S28, including a forward pump station to bring the structure back to its original design capacity. Storm surge barriers that connect the structure to high ground at the railroad tracks on the southeast corner of the picture here. We'd be installing living shorelines along the canal banks on the upstream and downstream side of the structure to help with water quality and habitat. And then a gated culvert that connects to a municipal golf course area that we would use during extreme events to store additional floodwaters. So when the stage in the canal comes up high enough, it would flow onto this golf course temporarily and be held in there until the stage in the canal comes down and we can release it back to tide. We'll also be enhancing the carrying capacity or the conveyance capacity of local canals upstream that are controlled by the county. So this map shows the difference in water elevation before and after the mitigation or the project is in place. So you can see in the bottom right corner there, that's the decrease in flooding that we get with the project in place. So it's a significant decrease in flooding impacts. So I'll go through this quickly because Cassandra is going to speak about this, but Chapter 5 is about ecosystem restoration and resiliency, which the district has been doing for 20 plus years. We have restoration projects in the Kissimmee River, Lake Okeechobee, Everglades, and coastal systems. The efforts continue to increase the ecosystem resilience in the face of warmer temperatures and climate change impacts, and help mitigate the effects of climate change through carbon capture and storage. And let's see. Yeah, so some of the things that our restoration projects do, slow down saltwater intrusion, healthier estuaries and bays, and more stable coastlines, just improve the environment, reduce marsh dryouts, increase quantity and quality of freshwater flow to the Everglades, higher flexibility and storage options to address water management seasonal needs, increase wetland acreage, and increase connectivity to coastal ecosystems. And you'll hear more about that from Cassandra later in the workshop. So I'd like to ask Carolina to come back up and speak about how we rank our projects.
Thanks, Dave. I'm just going to jump in here to provide some details on how we are characterizing and ranking the resiliency projects. That was one request that we received from our executive office in terms of how we are seeing that, how we are looking at those projects, how we say this is related to resiliency efforts in the agency, and of course, how we can rank. We are going to have to tackle the most urgent and priority projects first, understanding our funding limitations. And so this process is going to be an important process as we move forward with those projects implementations. We establish a criteria set. We organize them in 4 categories here. Just quickly going over this with you today, we are going to, so about 20% of the ranking right now, and please understand this is open for publics. We really appreciate your input on how we are seeing those things. So send us comments if you think those percentages should be presented in a different way. But right now in our draft document, 20% is going to what we are seeing as the likelihood of system deficiency, which means what's the degree of risks, of flooding risks and other impacts that we have in those areas. What is the consequence of those deficiencies? So looking at population, impacted population, critical infrastructure. So in those areas, in the project impact areas, what are the consequences of not fixing this specific component of the system? What are the benefits of the system enhancement? We're going to go through that next. And the project status. So are we already moving forward with design? And also, do we have additional investments included already in our CIP program that would allow us to move faster in the project implementation? One concept that I think it's important to detail here is what we are calling project impact areas. It was actually defined as part of the rulemaking process that FDEP is going on right now, Resilient Florida rulemaking process. It was not in the last version. It is right now. This is some of the comments we have been discussing with FDEP. So it's not just the project location itself that matters on how we rank, it's the project impact area. A reservoir is the best example. We might be located in an area really far outside. We might be not within any FEMA zone area or anything that the project location itself characterizes risks in terms of flooding. But yes, the project impact area, knowing that we have a storage reservoir, for instance, will have significant impacts in flood reduction in areas downstream, upstreams around the reservoir. So this is what we are trying to capture. So each project that we have in our plan right now has a project impact area included in our GIS project that we are using to rank and that we are mapping consequences, impacts, and all of that. So here's just 3 examples. So just a glance on the GIS project, how we look at those basins for the current projects in the plan, and then zooming into 2 specific projects here, L31 levee. You can see we have a significant area upstream of the levee that is here representing the project impact area. So areas that the levee will be providing additional protection. And Corby levee is the same. Another project that we have showing that we are protecting community downstreams here by this project. And not only that, but maintaining water levels in this huge environmental protected area upstream of the levee, which is the Corbett water management area here illustrated in this map. So we really map the basin. This is JW wildlife area. So we really map the basin, the entire project impact area, and this entire area is now how we are capturing the benefits associated with each of those projects. And of course, for the coastal structures, a big piece of our plan, we have all those basins that it discharged. So it's basically the drainage basins associated with those coastal structures. all the way far upstream. So even if we have a sub-basin, any structure, a divider in this basin, we are capturing the benefits for the entire drainage area that is directly or indirectly influenced by those coastal structures. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time here today, and we can go deeper in a separate effort, but we have a big agenda to cover. But glancing through the criteria that we have for this category, likelihood of system deficiency, what we are trying to capture again is the degree that we have in terms of flood risks there. So number one criteria is our level of service program assessments. Those results are the best way to really measure degree of flooding risks and vulnerability in those basins. So for the places where we have results, it comes straight from the outputs from those assessments, level of service. Akin is going to talk a little bit more next. So we basically have map areas from those assessments that is showing the degree of flooding. Second criteria here is non-events, so non-flooding events, so basins that have been impacted by recurrent flooding events, especially where we have not yet evolved to the level of service program. We are capturing those occurrences. We have maps showing where those are occurring, and this is also a criteria that is included as part of this rulemaking process going on right now with FDEP. We are looking at return period of overbank flooding. The example that I illustrated in the video earlier today is just one way of capturing those overbank flooding. It occurs along the canals. So where we see that is another criteria that we are using to measure risks. Likelihood of system deficiency here. Sea level rise associated with that. So if it is 1 feet of sea level rise that is going to be causing this overbank, then of course we have a higher priority there compared to a 3 feet of sea level rise that is going to be causing this overbank. Exceedance of canal operation range. This is another way that we can look. So thinking that we have a 3-tier system, if our canal, the primary canal, is exceeding normal operations, we know secondary canals, tertiary systems are going to be impacted. So we might not be seeing overbanking in our primary canal, but knowing it's above the normal operation, we might be seeing impacts in the secondary system. So this is another way that we look here on that. Finished flood elevations compared to FEMA-based flood elevations, FEMA's flood zones, and storm surge inundation exposure. So really mapping these LOSH maps here and seeing where we see impacts from storm surge inundation. Again, at a glance, I'll be happy to provide more details on how we did that if we have any specific question. When we look at consequences of the system deficiency, then within those project impact areas, we are mapping critical assets, how many we have in terms of critical assets there. And not only critical assets, but there is a new nuance in this Resilient Florida rulemaking process that is also talking about regional significant assets. So it's assets that we have regional impact. So we also have a category for that within this way of ranking here. We are looking at social vulnerability. So we have two ways of looking at that. So within each basin, what is the number of households that are under a pre-established income level. We are also looking at how many of those households are in areas that are low-lying areas. And we got the 6 feet elevation as our triggering our target there. So any of those social populations that are in low-lying areas and within those project impact areas. Then we also look at environmental protected areas that are being impacted by the project, total population within those basins in project impact areas, the importance of recognizing public water supply well fields, again, in those areas, so any potential of reducing protection for those public water supply well fields is also captured here on the way we rank the projects. And finally, the governments, local governments are establishing adaptation action areas. I believe all these criteria that we talk here are embedded in the way they characterize, they delineate those adaptation action areas. But this is a way that we can also understand how the local view is being prioritized here. So if a formal adaptation action area is established in any of those communities, we also give some additional points here just to capture that. Benefits from the system enhancement, we are looking at, again, nature-based solutions associated with those projects. ecosystem restoration benefits associated with those projects, a positive cost-benefit analysis, previous state funding allocated to the project. This is also in the rulemaking right now. Available match for the projects if we are exceeding or meeting and exceeding Florida Building Code designs and innovative technologies. And finally, just to reflect project status, I briefly mentioned that we have an inspection program that provides overall rating for the components of our system. So if our inspection program is already giving us a critical condition, we're going to, of course, follow the lead here and prioritize the projects that are under those priority lists from the inspection program. And this is also how we inform our capital improvement program. So if projects are there, if we have any project already in design, permit, or any additional status within the capital improvement program for the agency, we're also going to give some additional points. Here are just some maps. We don't need to go into detail, but it's showing how those criteria are ranging. So we think those project impact areas that we have in the plan right now. So the first on the left is critical assets, showing areas in darker or purple that we have more, like a higher density of critical assets. On the center is the regional significant assets. They basically follow the same pattern here. And then on the right is public water supply well fields, so basins where we have a larger number of public well fields. Those three maps here is total population on the left, again characterizing denser areas. Also the lower income households in the center, so finding where we have vulnerable population in those basins. And then finally on the left, on the right here is those vulnerable populations where we have a higher density of vulnerable population inside, under 6 feet, which is low-lying areas. With that, I'm going to invite Dave to come back and talk about the projects.
Thanks, Carolina. So now we'll go into the projects that were ranked as part of the ranking system that Carolina just described. So these are the projects that move forward and that we're going to try to implement. So we have coastal structures, resiliency, and these are all pretty much the same scope. We want to improve the pumping capacity at critical locations, add flood barriers, and increase the elevation of our structures, add additional backup and redundancy for existing and new infrastructure, meaning like backup generators and things like that. There's real estate needs, of course, with all of this that we need to deal with. And something to say about our planning for adaptation planning. All of our pump designs, forward pump designs, are going to be they're going to be put together in a way that we can add capacity over time. So we use a phased approach for that. So we're not spending a whole lot of money up front, only when we need it. So we have the S29 coastal structure. This is a basin, the C9 basin is fully developed with residential and commercial uses, 450,000 people, 100 square miles. And the project enhances this structure by raising the elevations, adding a forward pump, 2,000 CFS forward pump and backup generator, flood barrier, and we'll deal with the real estate. This is currently in design. S27 coastal structure, similar. This is in the C7 basin, also heavily developed and residential and commercial basin, 275,000 people, 32 square miles. Same types of fixes here. We have adding a forward pump, enhancing the elevation of the structure and gates. This is also currently in design, and we have a RFI for associated water quality technologies associated with this project. So some experimental technology for cleaning the water before it goes through the structure. Some of the other projects that rose to the top in the ranking: self-preservation mode at critical structures. The goals of self-preservation mode are to maximize the operational flexibility of the primary system structures during storm surge events. So this self-preservation mode idea, it enhances the structures with electronical and mechanical components and generators. And the idea is to be able to operate the structure remotely and actually without any interaction with it in some cases, so that we don't have the gates of a coastal structure being locked open prematurely. So if there's a storm surge event that we can handle with the structure, we'll be able to remotely keep the structure gates closed to keep salt water out. But if there's a really extreme event that would damage the structure, we'll be able to open the gates and let the water in to save the structure itself. Here's an interesting project in Palm Beach County. This is the Corbett Levee. The Corbett Levee is on the south end of the Corbett Wildlife Management Area, which is 60,000 acres of cypress swamp, pine flatwoods, sawgrass marsh, and hardwood hammocks. There are many threatened and endangered species that call the Corbett Wildlife Management Area home. We have red cockaded woodpecker, Everglades snailkite, gopher tortoise, indigo snake, and then other species that are important like bobcat and sandhill crane, wading birds, and waterfowl. This project, the western portion of the levee was completed, I think, back in 2012, around that time, and it was never completed. The eastern portion of the levee, eastern and northeastern portion of the levee were never completed. So completing this project will enhance the habitat in the Corbett Wildlife Management Area. It'll also reduce flooding impacts and increase resiliency of the flood control system in the Indian Trail Improvement District area. So basically, the wildlife management area has been held at really unnaturally low water levels because of the levee not being complete. So this will allow water managers to restore the hydrology to a more natural hydrology, which will increase the habitat value. South Dade Curtain Wall. This is a comprehensive flood protection strategy for Miami-Dade County. It builds resilience by providing flexibility to manage high water conditions in Water Conservation Area 3A. It's beneficial for both flood control and achieving restoration goals. Future phases will address the full length of the needed seepage barrier. And this is a project that has broad support from private, local, state, and federal stakeholders. The L31 levee project. This is enhancing the L31 levee to address storm surge risks and sea level rise vulnerability. Coastal study was performed to determine the level of resiliency of the levee currently and determine what the new crest elevation would need to be in order to counteract sea level rise and storm surge. We're recommending to start design under the following considerations: 100-year surge elevation, non-overtopping levee simulation, present day and future sea level scenarios starting at a 2-foot increase, and adding freeboard according to FEMA and United States Army Corps of Engineers guidance. Here's a study that would also be a nature-based solution. It's the Everglades Mangrove Migration Assessment Pilot Study. It's a demonstration scale project to help restore or help to mitigate against sea level rise using a nature-based solution. The idea for this project is you use dredge material that's readily available to make shallower areas in the estuary in order to plant mangroves. And then the mangroves, once they're planted, they start to accrete material over time to build elevation and help to keep up with sea level rise. I'm sorry, I also wanted to mention that study would also increase habitat values in the estuaries and increase wildlife habitat. Also in our plan, now we're going to our planning projects, and we have recurring needs for the flood protection level of service program that Akin will talk about a little bit later in the program. And I'm not going to go over every planning project, but our planning projects continue to advance data and monitoring efforts to advance science and reduce uncertainty in support of our resiliency planning and decision making. We really need to have data on rainfall, flooding occurrences, tidal predictions in order to bring all that information to the resiliency program. So a lot of our new planning projects are in support of the flood protection level of service program, and they focus on green infrastructure solutions, optimizing project alternatives, and other water resources protection design and pilot projects. And so next I want to introduce Mark Elsner, who's going to be speaking about the district's water supply resiliency planning.
All right, thanks, Dave. As Dave said, I'm Mark Elsner. I'm the Water Supply Bureau Chief here at the South Florida Water Management District, and I'll be talking about water supply resiliency. And water supply resiliency may be new to this plan, but the district has been engaged in protecting our water resources for over 40 years. Why is this important? The graph on the left shows that population in southern Florida has grown significantly over the last 70 years. We're approximately about 9 million people, and most of those people live along the coast. Over the next 20 years, we're projecting that population to increase by about another 2 million people. The graph on the right shows the associated demands for that population and the agriculture and other water use categories associated with that. And we're projecting our water needs are going to grow by, are going to grow by additional 500 million gallons a day over that next 20 years, from about 3.5 billion gallons a day, that's with a B, to about 4 billion gallons a day. And as you can see here in the purple and green, agriculture and urban or public supply are the two largest categories. So why is this important? We have the population, but we also have a significant investment in our water supply well fields. The map here shows the well fields located in Broward County, but this could be one of any of our coastal counties where we have many coastal well fields along the coast that are susceptible to saltwater intrusion and need to be protected. In South Florida, over 97% of our water comes from groundwater. You know, and if we have issues with these well fields, it's very expensive to move them, even if you could. All right, slicing South Florida, this shows if you turn it on its side, this shows the aquifers underlying the ground. Here we have freshwater aquifers such as lower and artificial represented by the water table, Biscayne aquifer and lower Tamiami aquifer here. And as you can see, those are very susceptible to saltwater intrusion in that they are connected to salinity or water bodies such as the Gulf of Mexico or the ocean. While I'm here, I do want to point out another aquifer that's heavily used down here, and it's the Upper Floridan, which is in the middle. It's brackish in this area. It's about 1,000 feet deep and requires desalination. You know, one thing with our freshwater aquifers, most of those have been, or their development has been maximized, and we've had to develop alternatives to meet our growing population. And you'll see in a future slide that the Upper Floridan has become an integral part of our water supply scenarios here in Florida and in the future. We do have a multi-pronged and integrated approach here at the district in the way of approaching resiliency and saltwater intrusion. It goes from the permitting and design of a system to regional operations, to monitoring how does this use affect our water resources and movement of saltwater intrusion, to regional analysis through groundwater modeling and water supply planning and providing that roadmap on how these future needs are going to be met. I'm going to cover a couple of these in my next couple slides. So our water source options, or what I like to call our tools in the toolbox. We can develop more water to meet our needs. That could include traditional sources such as fresh groundwater, fresh surface water. We have alternative sources such as brackish groundwater from the Floridan aquifer. We have use of reclaimed water and seawater. We also have options where we can capture excess fresh water when it's available, primarily during the rainy season, capture it through reservoirs and aquifer storage and recovery, and use it later when needed and primarily during the dry season. But another option is water conservation, and the cheapest gallon of water is the gallon we don't use. And through water conservation, we can continue what we do, but the concept is we're going to use less water doing it. Lower flush toilets, lower usage shower heads, irrigation systems with smart controllers, or educating our public. So on the bottom right shows the per capita in our district, and it has come down significantly since 2005. However, it's sort of leveled off for about the last 10 years. And I don't think that's saying we've got every drop of water in conservation accomplished or achieved. So we still need to look at that as an option. And through conservation, we could save hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure needs. All right, another tool is alternative water supplies. Here's two of them. On the left is use of brackish groundwater and seawater. This shows the current facilities that have been constructed within our district. Currently, we have 40 facilities with a capacity of over 290 million gallons a day. All those facilities do use brackish groundwater or reverse osmosis. There are 2 seawater desal facilities in the Keys that are primarily used on an emergency basis and not on a regular day basis. Another prominent option is wastewater reuse. Currently, we have about 300 million gallons a day of reclaimed water being reused for a beneficial purpose, primarily for irrigation of green space, including residential lots, golf courses, median strips. That's the good news. The bad news is we got about 600 million gallons a day that we're disposing of down deep injection wells and out to the ocean. And as we go forward, we need to find a way in how to put that water back to work for us and not using it once and disposing of it. Oh, I did want to talk, we do have cooperative funding programs for water conservation. We've had a program for over 20 years. And the Water Management District provided almost $9 million for 246 water conservation projects. And those projects have saved approximately 13 million gallons a day. We also have a cooperative funding program for alternative water supply. And over the last 20 years, the district's approved over $240 million to 525 projects. And those projects created approximately 515 million gallons a day of alternative water supply capacity. All right, to manage water and allow people to live here, we've constructed this really cool water management system, the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project, which gives us the ability to move water from Kissimmee the whole way down to the Florida Keys. A very robust system, and from a water supply perspective, this system has become integral into water supply. And it gives us the ability during periods of deficient rainfall, primarily during the dry season, we're able to bring water from Lake Okeechobee down through that canal system to maintain groundwater levels and recharge public water supply well fields and other users. The pictures on the bottom left shows the canal system within those urban areas and shows that it's easy to move water from our regional system into those canal systems to provide a recharge for water users. From a local perspective, water management, stormwater management is really critical. Here's in our Big Cypress Basin, back in the early 90s, 2000s, they actually looked at how could we increase or make our water system a little more resilient, a little more sustainable from an operations perspective and facilities. And what they found is if they raise water levels at the end of the rainy season into the dry season, it has a significant impact on water stored. And sort of that bullseye amoeba shows the increase in water levels at that one structure and how that extends out by increasing the water retained at the end of the wet season and going into the dry season. Another project in our plan is enhancing saltwater interface mapping. On the left shows a picture of Broward County. And back in 2009, we started an effort to map the saltwater interface, or the 250 milligram per liter concentration line, every 5 years, so that we can see if there's movement of that line one way or the other. And is there any encroachment into the aquifers along South Florida coastline? So in that map on the right, there are 3 lines, red, yellow, and blue. Where they're on top of each other shows no movement, and where there are differences in the location, that could be movement. It could be we've added additional wells to that inventory. But this gives us an idea of where to look. And you can tell that sometimes it's moved, the line has moved west, and sometimes it's moved east. But it's really prudent for us to stay on top of this and conduct the regular monitoring, and we plan on doing this every 5 years. Having tools to simulate the effect of sea level rise and climate change are critical to developing adaptation strategies for protection of our water resources. We have groundwater models that encompass our district, but currently we're expanding those models to be able to predict the potential impacts of saltwater intrusion and sea level rise and climate change. These models typically support the district's water supply planning effort. The map here on the right shows the East Coast surficial model. This is a new model that we're under development of. It covers St. Lucie County the whole way down through a portion of the Florida Keys. And what's cool about this is it's going to be able to look at some of the standard things of water levels, flow direction, but it's also going to have an ability to look at water quality through total dissolved solids. And through this, we'll be able to look at different sea level rise scenarios and be able to estimate the impact on our groundwater system and our water supply facilities. Once this is completed, we're going to take our lessons learned and take them over to the lower West Coast and update that tool to give us the ability to look at future conditions. And this information is compiled and evaluated as part of our water supply planning effort. The map on the right shows our 5 regional water supply planning regions. And we update the water supply plans in these areas every 5 years. The dates represent the year that those plans will be updated. And they're staggered by a year because we pretty much have the same staff doing each of those plans. So we'll go through the 5 planning regions in 5 years, and then we'll start over. These have 20-year planning horizons, and basically a water supply plan is a roadmap on how we're going to meet our future needs. It's a proactive approach, estimating what those future needs are, analyzing our water supply options, and identifying options and projects to go ahead and meet those needs. We've been doing these plans every 5 years since the mid-1990s. Something new that we're adding this year, and as we be part of the resiliency plan, is water supply vulnerability assessments. And these are currently being scoped, but we're looking at an effort that will be based on an evaluation greater than that 20-year period in our water supply plans. Will be 30, 40, 50 years, but looking at something longer term from a resiliency standpoint is our goal here. And these assessments will go ahead and provide guidance on future resiliency projects and also a direction on appropriate measures and criteria for the sustainability of our water resources. This effort is huge. That groundwater model that we talked about, the East Coast Surficial model, is first of its kind and the largest of its kind. So it'll be a valuable tool, but we're going to have a lot of lessons learned as we go through and putting that together. And with that, concludes my presentation.
We'll now be transitioning to the question and answer portion of this session. As a reminder, if you are in person and have a technical question, please submit it to the meeting attendant using section 5. You can find the documents by the entrance. If you're on Zoom, please type your question in the question and answer feature or raise your hand using the raise hand feature. If you called in, you can type *9 on your keypad to raise your hand and *6 to unmute yourself. Again, we strongly encourage everyone to submit questions. The presenters, I know, look forward to this section the most. With that, we have one question that was submitted so far in the question and answer, and that is, why didn't the district include in its service areas, in the entire service area in this plan, such as Martin and St. Lucie counties?
Thank you very much for the question. And yes, we are looking at the entire district boundaries. So Martin and St. Lucie County are definitely part of the plan. We might not have identified a project there yet, but we are coordinating really closely with those governments. We have a series of initiatives that we are advancing in terms of understanding how we might want to be seeing the project needs on those regions and collaborating and identifying projects. So yes, those two, all the 16 counties are within the area that we are looking at in defining resiliency priorities for the agency, and we are looking for collaborating closer with the counties and the local governments there.
Thank you for that question. We don't have any other questions yet on the question and answer chat on Zoom. I'd like to open it up to the floor if anyone has a question. You can make your way over to the podium or submit a technical comment.
Hi, Frank Bernardino, Anfield Consulting. The projects that you guys have already identified and prioritized, do we know the budget requirements for those projects? Are those built into the district's future plans? Or I know that last year the district submitted a lot of projects to the state granting program, and unfortunately we didn't do as well there as we had hoped. But I know that the local governments that I represent, if we're going to be dependent on state funds, the local governments that I represent would very much like to be your partner in echoing and advocating for that funding. So I just want to know a little bit about the plan of how those projects will be funded, if you can share that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Frank, for the question. I have some slides at the end to talk about that, but I have no problem on advancing a few of those topics now. So yes, we are going to depend on collaboration with the local governments. That's why we are taking significant steps towards that. We have been working with some of the counties in identifying how we can fund and collaborate in those projects. One example is the FEMA brick application that Dave illustrated in his slide. This was a proposal that the match was covered half by Miami-Dade County, half by the district. So that's the path that we're going to be pursuing in identifying funding sources for those projects, working with the state, with the local governments, and also beginning the discussion with the Army Corps. A lot of those projects that we have in the plan, coastal resiliency, specifically coastal structures, are what we are trying to target with the CNSF study, and hopefully we're going to have an avenue through federal funding there as well.
Hi, Natalie Fossell. I'm also with Anfield Consulting. One of your, I believe it was the nature-based slides, and you were talking about using a golf course as overflow in times of extreme weather. I was curious about the public outreach that you're doing on that. You know, we have a lot of people who have come down and they go, oh, my street is flooded. And we're like, well, that's part of the stormwater solution for when it rains. I'm just curious about having backlash. You're always going to have that of people who go, oh my gosh, this is flooded or that is flooded, but it's part of the nature-based solutions. And then along the lines with that, are you looking at public and private partnerships to do more of those types of things? Because a lot of times we're land constrained in order to be able to do those types of solutions. And if you're going to get to that, you can answer it at the time.
No, that's great. Those are all awesome questions. Thank you very much, Natalie. So the specific C8 project was presented to FEMA as a phase project, meaning we still need to advance design. So we have not fully engaged with the public yet. We did engage with the Village of Miami Shore. We had some very interesting conversations that are exactly as you were referring there. Are we gonna, like the golf course is a huge piece of the city plans. They by any chance do not want to get rid of the golf course, and that's nothing that we are planning here. So we had interesting discussions with them in terms of how perhaps the golf course can be utilized during extreme events to serve as additional storage area. And this is a great example of a nature-based solution that we could achieve in implementing projects in those areas. It's not yet the ideal solution because when we model, there is not a huge contribution. The problem is significant in some areas that even though where you have a large green area sitting next to our coastal structure, and we thought this was the ideal project when we model, we are not getting as much benefit. So this is really what we're navigating. The nature-based solution is a big piece of how we want to bring those solutions. That example is a great example, but all the topics that you mentioned in terms of first engaging the public, to understand what we want, what are the objectives, is this what you want for your community? So yes, we're going to go ahead and advance any of those coordinations once we get to the point. And then also, how can we really capture what are the benefits of those things? I think that's a big piece of what we're going to be advancing. Akin probably will touch a little bit that when he talks about the level of service program. We were initially focusing on flood reduction benefits, and we are understanding that those additional benefits that comes with nature-based solutions need also to be captured. So new metrics are being planned as part of the level of service program to address those needs. But we have a lot of steps to walk on that direction. Baby steps, yeah.
We have a caller with his hand raised. The number ends in 5372, so press *6 to unmute yourself.
Yes, this is Drew Martin with the Sierra Club. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I have two questions. The first is, when you're relying on forward pumps and you're in gates, what is the risk of the porosity of the rock? In other words, the water just coming in around the gates, and do you reach a point where, with the sea level, where that system is no longer effective? That's my first question.
Thank you very much, Drew Martin, for this question. And yes, when we look at those coastal structures, there are some additional things that we are designing. And Vijay will be touching a little bit of that in his presentation next from a design perspective. And you were very right when we are talking about the need of expanding the purpose of those structures. They were not designed to provide storm surge protection back in the 1950s, but we understand they can and should be providing multiple benefits. So there are some elements that we can bring to the design of those coastal structures that will enhance some of the storm surge protection there. So high tides, sea level. So all of those questions are being considered as part of the design. And you were right there. We need to be able to expand a little bit how we can function and how those coastal structures can provide benefits to the system.
My second question is, I like the idea of you using golf courses. I think that's a viable option. Even if it didn't hold a lot of water, it would still provide some benefits. I don't think people would object to the golf course being flooded if they realized that it was protecting their homes. But my question is, I just was down in the county of Miami-Dade where they were developing a golf course. So the question is, in order to maintain this available green space, are you going to become involved in planning and zoning changes where they're removing green space? And will you be requesting that counties not develop on golf courses so that those open spaces would remain? I know that might be somewhat controversial, but it would be useful if the Water Management District would weigh in when the county's looking at building on a golf course, if that golf course could be providing some benefits. That's my question.
Thanks again, Drew, and that's a very important question. We are not, so as a water management agency, we are not involved in of course, land use regulations. The effort that we are doing, as David described when he was talking about nature-based solutions, is to understand what are empty spaces in those very dense urban areas that we could utilize for distributed storage. Golf course is one example, but we have more open areas, open spaces that perhaps can provide us benefits in terms of storing more water, reducing the peak, slowing the flow, all of those benefits that we are hoping to achieve. Again, because we are not involved in land use regulations, we fully depend on collaboration with the local governments to understand if those available spaces, one, will provide benefits. So that's the piece that we are trying to model and understand from a flood reduction perspective in any associated water quality and benefit. And then second, what are the objectives? Look, so this is then, of course, letting the counties and local governments work in terms of what are the priorities that we have for implementing those projects and really utilizing those those open areas to, again, achieve the protection of the basin in terms of flood reduction. So it's a collaboration. It's really depending on partnering and working very closely with the local government.
I guess my question would be, would it be useful for you to become more active in those decisions and at least make a comment where it might actually be negative impacting? And I'll use my public comment period to follow up on this.
Yeah, this is something we can evolve as we advance those discussions and of course under the guidance of our executive team. But yes, from a flood reduction perspective, we will provide technical elements that can assist with this and really demonstrate the potential benefits that we can have in each area by allowing those areas to serve with the purpose of flood protection.
Yes, Judy Johnson, WSP. Actually, my question kind of ties in with the question of your previous caller. I come from a local government background, and very often there just is not the capacity for local governments to make these kinds of decisions. And your plan has been amazing. You have amazing infrastructural projects. My question is there any plan for the district to provide institutional support to local governments in strengthening their local plans?
Thank you. And yes, we do that. From a technical perspective, all the tools that we are developing, all the outputs from our models, all the data that we are compiling, we are really framing this in a way that can be easily accessed by any local government. So the hub that I show in my slide number 3 is where we are bringing all the data. So if from a local government perspective, if they need information to support some of those points in terms of increasing risks, the information can be easily found there. Increasing rainfall, increasing sea levels, evapotranspiration rates, where we are seeing migration of wetlands, for instance. So all this information and observations related to that and the data is available. This can support any assessment, vulnerability assessment from local government. In addition to that, Akin does not go include in his slide on his PowerPoint because we thought we are very late here, and he has a very extensive presentation, but he is in charge of a system that is incredible. It's the SMMS. It really makes all models, all the tools that we develop here available for the public. So input, model, and outputs that can be downloaded and utilized in any local vulnerability assessment. So we are committed to share the data and the studies that we are doing here as an agency to support any local government assessment and study.
So I think shameless plug, I will insert it, and I think even the presentation. So when I give my presentation, I'll give you the link to the statewide model management archive site.
I think that's a perfect transition to Akeem. Thank you everyone for those wonderful questions and thoughts. I know that there are still some more in the question and answer feature in the Zoom chat. We will get to them in the next question and answer portion. Thank you. And with that, Akeem.
All right, thank you. Good morning. My name is Akin Owoshina. I'm Chief of Hydrology and Hydraulics here at the South Florida Water Management District. I have a big talk that I've been asked to keep small. So I'm going to keep it small, enough to tease you, enough to want to see some of our earlier workshops and recordings, but I'll try to cover all the material. What I'll be talking to you about today, essentially, is how we use the level of service program to come up with regionally compatible projects or recommended courses of action that make it into a resiliency plan, and hopefully will also make it into capital development type efforts for our partners and local government. So you saw this slide earlier. I think either Carolina or David in their presentation talked about the regional system that we manage down here in Florida. The one important thing I wanted to stress with this slide is that flood protection responsibilities in Florida is multi-tiered. There's the primary system, the equivalent of the trunk, that's managed by the Water Management District, that's us, in partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And that often will get water to either restoration targets like the Everglades or ultimately to tide in most flood control type scenarios. That primary system takes water from the secondary system that is run by local government, municipalities, and in Florida, what we call 298 special districts, or special drainage or special water control districts. They run the secondary system. The tertiary system connects to the secondary system, and the tertiary system is run by homeowner associations or large landowners. But for flood protection to work in South Florida, all three have to be working well. And as you plan for future conditions, all three have to plan in unison so that the projects are compatible and work towards achieving the flood control goals within the region. So we talked about that big primary system, and on the East Coast, it is the CNSF project, built by the Corps of Engineers, or designed and built more than 70 years ago. Many of the features has more than 2,000 miles of canals and levees, lots of structures and pump stations, and I'm going to focus on the structures for the rest of my talk today. So many of those structures are coastal structures. They run along the coastline or just inland of the coastline and have multiple purposes. One, they are the last stand for managing our stormwater, but they also often serve a dual purpose of being saltwater intrusion type barriers. They are closed to prevent saltwater from coming in, and Dr. Moran in her presentation showed you one where with a king tide, the water level was overtopping the structure. But they are also opened during storm events or during rainfall events when we need to get rid of water and send water out to tide. So they serve this dual purpose. The one thing to remember, though, was they were built as part of the CNSF project, and many of them are 70 plus years old, reaching end of life. You actually have physical things happening to them. And with them approaching end of life, we have important decisions to make. Do we replace them? And what do we do when that time comes? Also, some of the assumptions that went into effect when they were being planned have become obsolete. When all of these structures were being planned, the population for South Florida was projected to max out about 2 million. It's kind of rocking about 8 million right now. And those structures with the operations of our water managers and some of the over-design that was done by the Corps, thankfully, are still serving the population very well. But as we replace them and look for the next 50 to 100 years, we're beginning to get the kind of questions, so what do we do? Do we retain the design or do we do something different? Also, many of these structures, when they were built, were looking at South Florida, where the population remained in the coastal areas, and farmlands and all that were on the western portions. Well, some of our cities are in those areas that were planned to be farmlands with minimal flood protection. And those cities now require flood protection. So we have flooding not only on the coast, but also flood risk on some of the inland communities that we have. And obviously, many of these structures, especially those along the coastline, are vulnerable to sea level rise, which wasn't a consideration during their design. We went through and did an initial vulnerability assessment back in, I think, 2008. So that's getting on almost 15 years now. And we confirmed that the majority of those structures along Miami-Dade, Broward, and those also on the West Coast in Collier County were some of our most vulnerable structures. As we came further north, we found a little bit more distance between the headwater and tailwater, or the ocean side and inland side, and they were considered less vulnerable. We repeated the work again in 2020 and confirmed the vulnerability of 27 coastal structures and identified the need to move forward on doing something at many of the structures right away. But all of this work, when presented to people who are responsible for making decisions in the agency, kind of raised the same type of questions. I've started asking some of them, do we replace the structures? When we do we replace them in kind? Do we replace them at the same locations? Do we move them? All of this type of decisions are important questions to answer, and the district back in 2000 and I think about 14 or thereabout, tasked my group, the H&H Bureau, with coming up with those answers. And the strategy we came up with is with the development of a flood protection level of service program. I'll spend a few slides talking about the program today, and then I'll focus on a particular phase of the work that looks for and identifies regionally compatible projects. So what did the program do for us? It was a systematic way of looking at all of the district's flood protection assets, determining if they're working well and if they'll continue to work well into the future, considering land use changes, climate change, not limited just to sea level rise, but also including future rainfall, more recently with some of the work we've advanced with the USGS. It allows us to identify at-risk infrastructure and places where we needed to take some action to be able to be sustainable in the future, allowed us to think with a resiliency mindset. And we realized very quickly that the nature of the projects we were looking at required extensive coordination with local government partners and stakeholders within these regions. So the program, the way we set it up, is built into three key parts or three phases. The first phase is essentially a vulnerability assessment. Its focus is on our assets, and it looks at the assets and see what they were designed to do, if they're able to continue to provide flood protection within the region, and if they will, with all of these changes I mentioned earlier. The second phase, which is a critical phase, and I'll spend some time talking about later on today, is the what we call the mitigation and adaptation planning phase. Now, while the first phase looks at our assets, this phase looks at the entire system, because a solution in the primary system that is not compatible with actions in the secondary and tertiary system will not work. And so to be able to come up with good projects that provide the flood control we're looking for, we felt it was critical in this phase of the work to do the work in concert with partners, local government, 298 districts. And I like the analogy that I think our chairman used during the last governing board meeting when he asked who was the quarterback. For the planning of the regionally compatible projects, we're the quarterbacks, and we're working with everybody to make sure that what comes out of this process are good, solid projects that work together well to provide the needed flood protection. The final phase is how we get things ultimately funded. A good plan on a shelf is no good unless it can be funded and implemented. And so projects that come out either through assessment, where we identify an early need, or that come out of phase 2 as a product of phase 2, make it into a resiliency plan, and ultimately will become projects that will be designed and built down the road. So what typically happens in a phase 1 assessment, I'm going to go through this slide very quickly because that's not the key of today's talk. If you want to hear more about this, there are all kinds of presentations that the district has given, and I encourage you to look at some of those. But we build hydrologic models during this phase to be able to simulate the regional system. I want to simulate how that system responds to changes in rainfall, land use, sea level rise, and so on and so forth. It includes looking at rainfall, storm surge, and the potential flood risk from those type of activities. We simulate current conditions. We also simulate future conditions with different amounts of sea level rise. We coordinate tightly with counties and partners in this phase of the work to make sure that we represent their systems well. But again, as I mentioned, the focus is still on our primary system in this part of the work. And the goal we have, and this is something we learned from others, and DOTs who I credit in this case, is this is an ongoing thing that we'll do in perpetuity. We try to visit each basin every 8 to 10 years. So we'll be doing this for a long, long time. Ultimately, when we identify an area where there's a deficiency, we move into a phase 2 study, adaptation study. And this is a regional focus, as I mentioned earlier. It's a public planning exercise. It involves many stakeholders as we do this planning work. In addition to modeling the hydrologic system, we also consider several other things, including looking at the damage or the flooding risk from no action, and then looking at the damage avoidance, or what are the benefits of different courses of action that we take. A critical aspect of this, in addition to looking at the projects that offer a good cost benefit, that means they offer more benefits than the risk of taking no action, is the sequencing of those courses of action. What goes first? What needs to happen by what time for flood protection to be preserved within the 16 counties that we serve? We end up with this study determining an optimal course of action, and we bring that course of action to a very preliminary level of design sufficient to get good cost estimate and advance the work. The type of projects you typically would see in this phase, and I think other speakers have talked about, we're looking at the non-traditional blue and green infrastructure. It could be detention, regional detention storage, or projects such as a golf course where you might have something within an urban setting where you could have make room for the river, essentially, either store water on a temporary basis, or multi-use facility, a park during good times and a flood system during dry times. You could also have the traditional type of gray infrastructure, including forward pumps that we've talked about also. So I inserted this slide. I wasn't planning on showing any results or anything, but it's important to kind of use this slide to make a statement. What you're looking at on the far left of your screen is the current condition map, and the color coding on those maps showing multiple basins is the level of service that's currently being achieved within those basins. The warmer colors show a lower level of service, and so if you're seeing oranges or reds, it means that you have a relatively low level of service that could be improved. And what I'm trying to stress with this is that while the middle plot shows you that with time and with sea level rise, the colors will get hotter and warmer, it does show that even with current conditions, some of those basins are already orange, and we need to actually be able to advance some work. And I'm going to mention our no regret strategies again a little bit later. But as we do work in the assessment, or as we do work in the vulnerability or the adaptation planning and mitigation planning, we are identifying those strategies that we think we can start on. We think they'll be part of any eventual solution we have, and we can advance them forward. And you'll hear a little bit more about a couple of those projects later on today. So I'm going to give an example from CHC9 watershed. It's the basins where we're starting work right now. Some of the lessons we're learning from that is the first of our phase 2 studies, and it was strategically selected by luck to straddle both Miami-Dade and Broward County, which allowed us to really engage with a broad swath of stakeholders, several 298 districts, municipalities, the counties, both counties, and allowed us, exposed us to some of the thinking that's currently going on. And it's a very, very interesting lesson that we've learned from that exercise. It's a public planning process, as I mentioned. We started with workshops planned within the study, but as we kind of moved along, we realized that the engagement needed to be tighter. And so we started having our partners at the technical meetings. These are technically dense meetings where we're presenting modeling results and talking through solutions. It's the sausage making of planning flood protection type projects. The hope here is that as messy as it might be in the short term, when we come out with recommendations, we'll have the support of our key partners. We might not be in full agreement on what to do, but we'll understand how we ended up where we ended up, and we'll all agree that these are the next reasonable steps to take. The lessons we've learned so far. Oh, one more thing to add. So the work we're doing at this point is focused on, we're looking at solutions inland of our coastal structures, but we're doing assessments that must also include the downstream portions of our coastal structures. Through some other efforts, other than the level of service, we will further engage in the areas downstream. But for right now, with the level of service, we're looking at projects upstream of our coastal structures. So some of the levels we've learned, I told you that in working with these multiple groups, we've come up with some very interesting discussions. One big one is the paradigm shift that's happened in flood protection. 40, 50 years ago, a good flood protection project sent water to tide as quickly as you could. From talking to all of our partners and stakeholders we're working with, that's no longer what they're looking for. They're concerned about the water quality impacts of sending water to tide and getting rid of water that you could potentially use. And so a lot of what we're hearing is the possibility of minimizing what we ultimately lose to tide and finding a way to maximize the benefits, other benefits from the project we end up selecting. In trying to do that, we've realized that the traditional methods for assessing or determining flood projects are not capable of identifying some of these green infrastructure. If you're just basing it on flood damage reduction, there has to be another way of looking at the benefits of a project that will allow some of those projects to naturally be selected, or at least to rise up enough to be considered by leadership and decision makers using a less objective, maybe a more subjective method. So what are the type of adaptations we're looking at? I kind of inserted this slide. I think Carolina talked to one or two of these already. We have forward pumps at the coastal structures, and we have improvements to gates, tie-back levees to connect some of these structures to high ground. We have distributed storage, different places within the watershed. We have improvements to canals. We've looked at everything, including deep injection well, to put some of the water somewhere else other than just to tide. And we've modeled many of these. We've also had some potential projects that were difficult to model, but that we're evaluating in other ways. And one of the hard lessons we're learning is that there was a reason why gray infrastructure and the traditional methods worked. We will still need to send water to tide. And improvement at our coastal structures is going to be a part of the solution we come up with any of the structures. And by seeing some of those things, it's made it really clear to us that some of our no-regret strategies may need to be making some of the initial changes at some of these coastal structures to recover some of the lost capacity from gravity discharge. We realize that we need to kind of work with nature to continue to move water to the lowest point, which is obviously to tide, but find a way to balance that by promoting other projects that reduce the volume that we ultimately will send to tide. It's a challenging task, and we're still going through it. We're still doing it for the C8, but like I mentioned, we're learning lots of lessons that we're building into the scope for our C9 project, which is the next one that we'll be picking up hopefully later this year. Okay. On this slide, I just wanted to highlight one more thing before I left. So we've talked a lot about blue and green infrastructure and gray infrastructure in looking for overall strategies. At the end of the day, the objective for the level of service program is to provide flood relief, okay, and flood protection. And so we are going to evaluate to do those things. But what's different with this from other traditional projects is that we're also trying to see if there's some way of being able to take and monetize benefits from water quality or other things that the district's heavily involved and invested in. And if we could somehow find a way to straddle those different objectives of the district and come up with really good projects that provide long-lasting flood relief and also has some other benefits that can ultimately be selected. You're going to hear in a minute or two from one of my colleagues about some of the no-regret strategies we're looking at, working S27 and S29. These are gravity structures that we're going to couple with our forward pumps. And later on, you will also hear about some of the things we're looking at with reliable or renewable energy. We understand that with adding pumps, there's going to be an energy component to this. And so there'll be other speakers in this block of the workshop that will speak to that as well. And with that, my shameless plug, Carolina, I did insert it. When we're done with, when we're done with the adaptation planning, there's a final phase, and there are many things that are part of that final phase. But it's a critical phase for us to move projects into design. It's an opportunity for us to continue coordination. So we plan together with people, but when it comes time to implement the projects, we will have some of the projects that are part of the recommended course of action, but so would local governments or 298 districts. And this is the phase where we get a chance to continue to talk to them, where we go to our board, maybe some of them will be in the room to show support, or when they go to their local government, maybe some of us will be in the room to show support. But it's going to be critical that each of the people responsible in the tiers move their projects forward for these combined evaluated projects to continue to work together. The tools that we generate from all this work are served on the statewide model management system, and there's a link provided on this slide and on the next one that you will see. And ultimately, as I mentioned, we're going to revisit each basin every 8 to 10 years. So once we're done with one cycle, we kind of start getting things ready for the next cycle in each of these basins and that is my shameless plug for the MMS tool. Feel free to take advantage of this and Spelunk and call us if you need to. I'll be wrapping up my talk at this point, and the next speaker, I believe, is Vijay Mishra.
Thanks, Akin. So I'm going to build up on what Akin mentioned about no regret strategies. So I come from the Engineering and Construction Bureau. We are responsible for design and construction of these facilities. So Akin mentioned about no regret strategies. So based on the FPLS phase 1 work that was done, we found out that there are some things that we can proceed without finishing the phase 2, which is the FPLS. Right now we are working on C8, C9. So there is a lot more work that is going to be happening in these basins, but we know few things that definitely needs to happen, which is the improvement to our canal structures. So we picked S27 and S29, and why we picked them? Again, David, Dr. Maran, and Akin have all talked about it, how we pick structures. So we picked 2 structures, and when I get involved on a project, that means we are on the phase whereby decision has been made, we need to do something about this structure. Now, how we actually make that change, that's where I come in. So the first 2 structures that we're going to look at, S27, S29, these are the general locations of S27. They both are located in Miami-Dade County. As Akin had mentioned, the S29 straddles both the Miami-Dade County and Broward County. So we get the drainage from both of those counties. And the improvement that we are going to make to S29 is going to impact both counties, whereas S27 is more on the southern end. We have S28 in the middle, which is one of the next structures that we are going to start looking into adding forward pumps and improving that structure itself. So when I talk about improvement, what are we really trying to do? And again, this is very localized to a structure. We are not looking anything too far up or too far down. We are looking at localized, again, that no regret strategy that Akin had talked about. So in this structure that you're looking at right now, it's basically S29 structure that's located on Snake Creek Canal, known by C9 Canal also. So what we are going to be doing is we are going to be improving the existing structure, which is just on the south side of this image. So south side of this image, you can see in the aerial photographs, and the forward pump that you're looking at is going to be located in north end of the structure. Right now, you are only seeing a 4-bay structure that we are looking at a pump station, but we have already, based on the information that we got from FPLS study phase 2 that is going on, we have already made a determination that the structure needs to be bigger. So right now, we are looking at a 6-bay structure. So a little bit about the S29 existing structure. It was, again, I think authorized back in 1948 and built around late 50s and 60s. It's a 4800 CFS. So when our modeling team from the Akin's group and my design team looked at it, we came up with a good point where what should be the size of the Ford pump station. In this case, it came out to be 2500 CFS. But along with the Ford pump station, we also need to improve the existing structure. So we are looking at raising the whole structure. And when you say raising the whole structure, it means you're talking about structural element, you're talking about mechanical element, you're talking about electrical element, civil element. Everything has to be raised up. And I think one of the questions, one of the previous public person asked about, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to make sure that the water doesn't go around the structure once you make these improvements? Well, yes, that's a good point. So what we do when we are working on these structures is we try to tie them back to some of the high facilities. And most of the time, if you are from South Florida, you know that it's going to be either FEC or US 1 of those two roads you got to pick up, because that's where you have to tie in your structure improvement. So in this case, S29, we are going to be tying in the improvement to Biscayne Bay Boulevard. So looking at the Ford pump station, it's a very generic layout of the pump station. It's a 2500 CFS. It's going to have its inflow canal, outflow canal. It's going to have a trash rake on the upstream side. So basically water is coming from your left, and then it goes through a trash rake, which is this angular element of the structure. And then it goes through these FSI inflows, and then through an impeller, it goes on the discharge side. It's not very different from our pump stations in terms of what we typically design, but it's different in the sense that these are what we call open discharge kind of pumps. And the reason why we are going with these open discharge pumps is because we know one thing for sure, that these structures are going to be built in the middle of a heavily residential area. So the availability of land is very small. So as a design decision, we have made a call to minimize the impact as much as possible. And one of the design decisions we have made is to look at these open discharge kind of pumps, which basically reduces the need of the deeper invert of your pump station, and also need of the keeping your pump station very high, and size of the pump station also goes smaller. So we are looking into these. We haven't done one of these in the district before, but when we reached out to our industry partners, this was one of their most favored recommendation for the kind of pumping system we are looking into. Right now, we in the design phase, we are in the modeling phase, our CFD model. So we are looking at what is going to be happening once we have both pump and the structures operating at the same time. So we are looking at all kind of operational scenario. We are looking at scour elevation. And the other thing I told you about is the capacity and the number of pumps. So right now we are looking at six bays. But the problem is, if the pumps are too big, then the need of power, or there is not commercial power available that you can simply hook up and get your pump station running. So you may need to bring in a new source of power, or the FPL or whoever the commercial energy provider maybe need to bring in new power. So we are going to be looking at how can we make sure that we can maximize the utilities that are already on the job site, on the site, and not need to bring any additional power to the project. So that's primarily what we are looking at the pump station. As far as the structure is concerned, as I said, so we are looking at improving the height of structure. So in this case, the S29, the current structure sits at around 2.44 NAVD elevation. We are looking at raising this structure up to 11. So you're talking about 9 feet of raising of the structure. And remember, Akin had said about when these structures were built, they were built to move the water from the upstream side to the downstream side. They were not made to have water going back from the downstream to the upstream. So my structural engineers and civil engineers, they are looking into how is it going to be feasible, because the load itself is not too much with respect to the structure, but adding these hydrostatic and hydrodynamic load, is the structure going to be stable when we raise the structure to 11 feet? And if the analysis comes back and says that it's not feasible, then we may have to go to the other strategy, which is going to be replacement, which is going to be a very costly endeavor. So we are looking into that. When we do any of these structure improvement, we are talking about raising the structure itself, raising the gates, bridges, all the platform, the operating platform, everything has to be raised from where they are by almost 9 feet, which is a major challenge. So the design teams are looking at it. They are doing all kind of structural analysis to make sure that is feasible when we do it. Now, the other structure that we are looking at is S27. Again, this is, again, authorized at the same time around 1948, built around the same time, late 50s and 60s. And in this is slightly unique from S29 in a sense that this has very small footprint available for the project. We are looking at literally less than an acre. So we are trying to cram so much of capacity in a very small area because we need area for the inflows, because the pump's going to need a new inflow, they're gonna need an outflow, you're gonna need generator rooms, control buildings, fuel tanks, all those things are needed. So we are trying to cram a lot of that in a very small area. And if you look at the photograph that you're looking at right now, you have the FEC on the north, so we need to have a required buffer, and we have a canal on the south side. And if you just look further south of the canal, you will notice that there are residential properties so close to the project. So we are trying to make this facility in a way that it can be conducive with the area. The fact that you are going to have pumps, and pumps make noise, and they may need backup generator also. That is also going to make noise. We have a very small area, so we need to keep the footprint very small. And the couple to unique thing about this facility is that this canal is known for a lot of trash coming from the upstream. And it's very popular with manatees. So when we are looking at our design, we are also looking at the fact that how can we make sure automate the movement of the trash from the canal through the pump station, and also making sure the manatees are still safely moving upstream and downstream of the structure without impacting their movement. So as far as the structure is concerned, it's very typical to what we just talked about on the other one. This is also have the same concept whereby you have the FSI inflows and the open discharge system, same trash rake system, everything else is pretty same. The only difference is this is going to be a smaller pump station around 1500 CFS, because the original structure is around 2800. So based on our modeling and the work that Akeen's group did, we came up with the approximate size of this pump station at 1500 CFS. As far as the structure is concerned, also again, the same thing. In this case, we are looking at raising the existing structure by almost 7 feet. In this case, the design team, the structural design team, when they were looking at the structure, they said it may not be feasible to raise the structure to that 7 feet. Why? Because of the way this structure was built. So we are looking at how much more life can we get out of this structure? Can we get another 20 years, 30 years? So we are looking at that and trying to make sure that that does happen. So when I showed you these images, these were the product that we see right now happening. But before this happening, and once Akeen's team finished the FPLS, and right now they're working on FPLS phase 2, there's a lot of work that goes in the design aspect. And what you see here is a list of few things that we have to do. Obviously, we are looking at the field investigation, geotechnical survey. We are looking at stakeholder engagement. We have FPL. Again, these pump stations have huge power requirements. So as a matter of fact, on the S27, we are looking in bringing a complete new line to the side, which is off almost from a half mile from their substation. Why? Because their existing facility cannot support the pump station. So we have to engage them from very beginning and ask them, okay, what size of the pump station we need to do? Local government, because most of these projects don't have the lands available in the project, like in the district footprint. So we are working with local government. It could be a private entity also in the case. And I think that the third one is the engagement with the FDOT and FEC. This is where I think one of the Drew's question is how are we going to tie in? So we are already working with FDOT to make sure that our structure gets to tie into one of these higher facility around our structure, so the water doesn't goes around our structure and comes back into the canal, and we are just circulating the water. And again, the big piece of real estate is the whatever lands we have a clear bill of health from environmental and cultural point of view. And again, if you are in Miami-Dade County, you will find out these are very sensitive topic in that area. So we are dealing with those, and luckily for both sides, we have been able to finish these activities. And then last and least is where you actually see your design, which is the blue, the actual plans, the CAD plans that are coming at the end of it. So we have been working on this. We have obviously a timeline from the start to finish. So we are already done with most of this field investigation and the stakeholder outreach and all those things. We have already started working on that. The next deliverable we have on this project is the preliminary design, which is a 30% design. It is coming in August. We are expecting to have some good information in it so that we can share with our rest of the district design review team, and they can give us some feedback on that. As far as when we are going to finish the design, we are looking at December 2023, which is basically next year. We are looking into finishing these designs. And depending on the availability of the funds, the real estate, and the permits, we are hoping to finish the construction of these 4 pump facilities and structure improvement by December 2026. And it's a typo there, so we'll make it 2026. With that, this is where we are with these 2 structures. And again, as I said, these are just the first 2, and we have a lot more going to come after this one. So the next is S28, and we have a few more after that. With that, I'm done with this presentation, and back to you, Itzi.
Thank you, Vijay. We'll now transition to the next question and answer portion. We are quite behind schedule, so we're going to try to go through as many questions as we can as possible. The first question is by Mr. Jake Leach, and it's, are groundwater levels increasing in the C7 basin? And I believe this question was from the previous session of presentations. Are groundwater levels increasing in the C7 basin?
I wish I could answer just right now, but the expectation is under future conditions, there would be groundwater level increases in all of the coastal basins. And the reason is, as sea level goes up, one of 2 things must happen. Either groundwater level has to rise with it to keep the freshwater side in balance with the sea side, or the saltwater will move in, driving the water level up. So yes, the water level will rise. If it's rising currently, I'll expect it is, but I'll have to take a look at the data, and I think Mark will probably have some of it from the monitoring we're doing.
I can add 2 things here. So one, there is an FIU study that was done exactly to anticipate future conditions. And yes, there is a map as part of that study that shows wet season average increase for some basins in Miami-Dade. So yes, for the Miami-Dade area in general, there is a similar map that was produced by Broward County. So the expectation is, yes, increasing in groundwater levels as a result of sea level rise. And we are accounting for that as antecedent condition in our groundwater models. So when we look at the flood protection level of service, one of the boundary conditions is initiating those models with what is projected in terms of wet season average, groundwater wet season average, to run those models. And Mark, I know we are also discussing that when we advance our groundwater model. So as an agency, we do not have a regional groundwater model yet. So we depend on those results. For instance, this is a study from FIU that is back from 2019, and we also the Broward County maps to model those antecedent conditions and represent in our efforts. But we are going to be expanding our groundwater model ability here at the district when we bring the variable density component, and we will be able to do similar studies from a regional perspective. I'm not sure, Mark, if you want to add anything just in terms of our groundwater models in one of the products of this effort that will also be providing information in terms of average groundwater levels.
I don't have too much else to add to that. Like I said, we are using our ModFlow model and the CWAT version of that. So it is a density-dependent model looking at total dissolved solids. It will be integrated with our regional system modeling, and that the 2x2 and RSM will provide boundary conditions to that tool. So we've meeting regular with Keen's group as we're developing this to make sure that we're coordinated.
Thank you. The next question actually ties quite nicely to your last point, and it's in regards to groundwater vulnerability and future condition scenarios, how is future groundwater usage predicted?
As part of our planning effort, I had mentioned in my presentation that development of much of our freshwater superficial aquifer systems has been maximized. And in this area, they are, increase in allocations are restricted through restricted allocation area. So at this point, those superficial withdrawals are limited. And that's how we're determining the volume of water that could come from the superficial aquifer in this region, and look at the potential impacts of those withdrawals and changes in sea level and resulting saltwater intrusion to see if that is still a good assumption that that volume of water can be withdrawn from, this case, the Biscayne aquifer. And as I indicated too, many of our utilities have diversified and have tapped the Florida aquifer to meet any increases in needs beyond what was in their permit allocated from the Biscayne.
Thank you, Mark. The next question is from Brent, and it's, which sea level rise scenarios is the South Florida Water Management District using to predict sea level rise? Is it the NOAA 2017 or 2022 curves, or the ACOE, or other? And which scenario, low, intermediate, etc., does the South Florida Water Management District use a single scenario or different scenarios depending on the asset?
Thank you for the question. And yes, we have multiple ways of looking at those scenarios. So for the level of service, instead of going on a specific projection, for all the studies, we look at +1, +2, and +3 sea level rise. And then we tie to we could use those results and tie to the timing of that according to what you get, meaning that we are not tied to one specific projection. So we are not planning for a 50-year horizon with that specific curve telling us what's the sea level rise on that specific year. So we have more flexibility by just having those thresholds as we evaluate those conditions as part of level of service assessments. For water supply vulnerability assessment that Mark was discussing, we are looking at the latest NOAA 2022 projections. We also are coordinating with the state. And in Florida Hub, we send them the specific question. As we understand, Resilient Florida legislation has a reference to the NOAA curves to be adopted as projections. So we got an okay from them as well, understanding that the 2022 NOAA intermediate low and NOAA intermediate high is the range that we're going to be coordinating, and they were going to be utilizing and reevaluate water supply vulnerability assessments. So to answer your questions, yes, we are looking at those different projections. We are looking at a range, not just one projection, and we are using the latest NOAA curves as possible to all the assessments that we are doing.
There's another question that ties into that nicely. The district primary canal elevations are operated based on their original Army Corps of Engineer design levels. Communities are looking to plan infrastructure projects based on sea level rise. Shouldn't there be a uniform sea level rise elevation for each of the district canal basins so that we're all on the same page when implementing these projects?
Yes, and this is kind of tied to the last question. So I'll go back to the last question a little bit and then come back up to this question. So Carolina mentioned that for...
Recording in progress.
It goes. Okay. So as Carolina mentioned, okay, nice. You gave me some time to think about my answer. So as Carolina mentioned when she responded to the earlier question, for the level of service program, we really tackled this problem early. We realized that there was all kinds of uncertainty about the curves you could use. There were the coarse curves, there were the compact curves, there are all kinds of curves out there. And depending on where you started, you would always be wrong to somebody. And so the approach we decided to take was a little bit different. We turned the problem around. It wasn't a question of what curve would you be in 50 years and what would that sea level rise be. wanted to look at our assets, and it was set up in this case very nicely for the type of project we had. We wanted to find at what amount of sea level rise would our assets start losing efficiency, and wanted to make sure that the analysis we did bound that point. And so that when we did sea level rise, no sea level rise, 1, 2, or 3 foot sea level rise, we're trying to see if our structure started to not work as well within that window. And if it did, we'll find out at what level. Is it 1.5 feet of sea level rise? And once we determine that, it then becomes possible to go to anybody's curve and say, on this person's curve, 1.5 feet is 30 years away. On this person's curve, 1.5 feet is 15 years away or 25 years away. And to build a project like this, we need 10 years. So we need to be planning, or we need to be designing now, or in 10 years, or in 15, or in 25 years. And so as those curves change, and I think there's an update this year, as those curves change, we can just slide on whatever curve you come up with and figure out where we are. And so to this current question, yes, it's important to work together. And so when I said we were quarterbacking on the planning, that's why when we're doing level of service, even for phase 1, we talk to the municipalities and the local governments. Fortunately, on the southeast coast, there's a climate compact that all of those counties are part of, and they've developed curves, and we've looked at those curves, and we've made sure that consistent with those curves, the approach we've used still works. So that when we're looking at what the district ultimately does, we're looking at the same type of information. Would there be sea level rise? Depending on the curve that we're on, we might end up saying we need to take action in 15 years from now versus in 12 years from now. But when we're planning together and we're talking about who needs to do what next, it becomes a little bit easier to ultimately plan our projects, even if we use slightly different curves. But the key is to be communicating about our plans, sharing our analysis, and including everybody's project in our analysis to show how they work together. And so it's a very good question. It's an area that we think we're tackling in a innovative way. But when we start building the projects and they all work together, then we'll know for sure that it worked.
Akin, that was a fantastic answer. Thank you. Next question. For the S28 mitigation options, what is deep? For deep injection wells, are you able to inject into the Biscayne Aquifer at this location? Is it not east of the 10,000 total dissolved solids line? Do you track the depth of saltwater interface?
Yeah, so that question will ultimately be answered in design, but it will likely be in the boulder zone. It will be outside of any aquifer that's being used for anything. For the purpose of the level of service planning work, the volume is just removed from the surficial system. It's removed from the stormwater that you see. We actually don't model what it does down there. But if this alternative filters to the top, and it's one of the courses of action we take, then as Vijay showed for the S27, S29, more detailed work will follow that determines the exact layer, the exact size of the well, and a few other things like that. So, but this is a concept that came up from the discussions as a way of moving water out of the surficial system where it could be in people's lawns or garages or whatever it is, and not putting it in the bay where there's a water quality problem or issue, but instead putting it in the boulder zone, which is a filling system. And so the details of that component will be developed further if that alternative or if that project stays within our recommended courses of action.
Thank you, Akin. Well, now, Irela Bagu, you have your hand raised. If you want to unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank you all for hosting this very informative workshop today on resiliency and sea level rise. Particularly pleased with Carolina and Akin and your partnership. I'm also pleased that you've incorporated the words water quality sprinkled about in the presentations. As a former governing board member of the South Florida Water Management District, I recall when I served, flood protection was a primary focus when planning. However, based on the environmental issues that we've experienced across many of the district's areas of service over the past decade, including Biscayne Bay, it is clear that we can't move water the same way anymore without addressing nutrient pollution loads and finding ways to hold water using a combination of green infrastructure as well as incorporating local government sea level rise strategies and planning. So Miami-Dade County looks forward to continuing our working relationship with the district as we work towards improving the system while protecting our water supply and our natural resources. So it wasn't really a question rather than a thank you, and continuing to support the work we're doing together.
Thank you very much, Urella. I'm looking forward to the call later this week to discuss innovative technologies that we can perhaps seek to implement as part of our designs at those coastal structures with you.
Thank you, Rilla. Next question. Could you please further explain what it means when you state that a control structure is going to be tied back to an elevated road or the FEC corridor? Thank you.
What that basically means is there is going to be either a retaining wall, or it could be just a sheet pile, something that's going to start from the structure elevation, and it's going to go up to the higher elevation. Again, it could be an FDOT road, or it could be a rail track. So it's basically a structural feature that is going to be connecting the structure with the higher ground.
Thank you, Vijay. With that, we're going to proceed to the next. Oh, okay, we'll do one more question. Number 5372 in the Zoom, if you want to unmute yourself. I believe you're still muted. Press *6 to unmute yourself.
I'm sorry, this is Drew Martin. Are you asking me to ask my question?
Yes, go for it.
My question is, when you're doing your modeling and you're using these forward pumps and you're tying this to other structures to prevent the water from coming around, at some point you may elevate the pressure, causing a break in the system. So during storm events, do you have a modeling scenario where you turn off the forward pumps when you reach that saturation point? And then I have a follow-up question.
So yes, you're right. Right now, that's exactly what we're doing. We are looking at all operational scenarios and what are going to be the impact. What kind of enhancement we need to do with the existing structure, and what are we required to do with the new forward pump station. So the design team is looking from both the structural and modeling point of view, making sure we have accounted for all those scenarios that you're talking about.
My follow-up question is, historically, water did not flow to the ocean mostly. It mostly flowed to the center of the state. So are you looking at modeling where you would pump water rather than sending it out to the ocean, but sending it into, for instance, agricultural areas that don't have a lot of people on them, where you could flood those areas to protect the more populated areas sandwiched between the coast and the Everglades ecosystem?
Thank you very much for the question. And I think the best answer to this type of regional coordination. So it's going to be a new study that's coming. So just to clarify the way I want to answer this question. Right now, when we do LOS and when we assess those flood vulnerabilities, we do on a basin by basin or a group of basin assessment. In order to be able to look at a more regional approach, as you were describing here, like finding at the regional system areas that perhaps we can and should bring more water, we have needs. Irela was just pointing to the need of water quality in the bay, which is dependent on fresh water flows as well. So this is, the way we see that is in a more regional scale. So we're going to have a study that we are going to be initiating with the Army Corps next, is this Central and Southern Florida Flood Resiliency Study, where we will have the opportunity to leverage the work from the level of service. So get the information from a basin by basin and look at project alternatives and a more regional scale that will help us achieve those additional benefits, additional strategies and goals that we have for the system as a whole. Not sure, Akin, if you want to add anything.
I think you got that mostly. And also, there are one or two activities currently going on. The BBCR project, for example, is a project that the folks doing our level of service work are able to talk to. And that project is looking at opportunities to move water a little bit west and then move it south and then bring it back to the bay in an area where it's needed further south. And also, it's interesting you asked this question, because when we're looking at alternatives for the level of service program itself, one of the things that came up from somebody on my team actually is moving water west into the conservation areas. The challenge with that is water quality. If you're going to move stormwater into the conservation areas, there's a little bit more that's involved with the cleaning and moving of that water. And the challenge, as I call it, is the challenge of big volumes, little time. And so I think the regional resiliency study, what they call maybe an opportunity to tackle this more robustly. But this is something we're thinking about. And if we're successful, then it means a reduction in what goes to the bay, and will make Irela very happy.
Fantastic answers. The next question is from Carrie Schumann. I believe Akin briefly mentioned the balance of looking at upstream versus downstream impacts associated with the level of service for flood control structures. I'm a part of a community downstream of these structures. Can you expand a bit more about what you mean by the upstream versus downstream focus and the timing you mentioned?
Yes, thank you. And this is an interesting question. Some of our structures are quite close to the coast, and whatever we do there, we've captured most of the communities and very minimal impact downstream. But some of our structures are far enough from the coast that people live downstream of the structures. But those structures are the tools we have for providing flood protection currently as part of the CNSF system. What we realize is that as we make adaptation plans to provide relief upstream of our structures, it's critical to make sure that we do not make the situation worse for the people and the communities that are downstream of our structures. So we're looking at solutions where we have current assets in this study, but we're looking at impacts everywhere to make sure that anything we recommend is potentially buildable without creating an adverse impact on somebody else. And if it does that, we can mitigate that impact. Now, Dr. Moran mentioned earlier, just a few minutes ago in response to another question, that we'll be working with the Corps on a study to look at the CNSF system holistically. I think that would be a great opportunity to look at the area downstream of the structures and the area upstream of the structures and how they interact together. But what I meant when I said that the level of service program is doing its solution search upstream and looking at the impacts everywhere was just to distinguish between the fact that when we get to this phase 2 study, we have to model the entire basin. We need to be able to say what could happen if we put a pump, for example, at a gravity structure, or if we divert some water to a storage someplace upstream. We need to be able to look at the impact of that downstream and hopefully demonstrate that it's not adverse, or at a minimum, it's neutral.
That's a great question, Carrie. Next question is from Susan Bodman. There appears to be a need for land space no matter how much footprint is decreased. How long does the district have allotted for acquiring the needed space for improvements, replacements, rehabilitations?
So to quickly answer the project that we are working on. So we are already working on, Dr. Moran has already been working with the local governments, and in the case we have a need to purchase the land from a private entity, our real estate group is working on it. So we already have this effort ongoing. It's not, it starts the moment we start the project, and in one of the slides when we talked about the real estate, we work on it the moment we identify the project to start. So this is going on, and I'm pretty sure Dr. Moran has something else to add on that.
Yeah, so Vijay is very precise in talking about the projects that we are already under design and where we identify the land. So for the coastal structures, yes, we initiated real estate negotiations to purchase the land. And the question is about the time. We anticipate that we need a year in average or even a little bit more, depending on who is the owner of the land. So for the two coastal structures, one is a public land from a park in Miami-Dade. The other one is a private owner. So we are initiating all those steps to purchase the land. This question can also be interpreted in terms of additional areas. We talk about green spaces, green infrastructure. This is also a piece of how we want to, the types of projects we want to be bringing to the alternatives we are looking at. And of course, it requires land. So if we can measure the benefits, and if it, I like the way Akin was answering the question about the ASR, not ASR, sorry, the drainage wells. What we need to do is, if we identify areas in our basins that we could store additional water and the benefits are enough, that those alternatives will be selected among the recommended strategies, alternatives in those in those assessments as part of the level of service. Yes, we're going to go further, identify the needs, and initiate the process of acquiring land. So again, we need to filter them out as part of recommended strategies in our level of service adaptation planning efforts.
Thank you both. That was a fantastic question. Next question. Has modeling been done to show the impact of operating the forward pumps on downstream water levels? Is the district constrained in their operations at all, i.e. the district cannot induce flooding?
I'm going to take that, should I take it?
I'm going to let Keen answer first, and then I'll answer on the specific structure location.
So when I mentioned earlier that we would look at, when we propose a project, that we'll look at the regional impacts of that project, that's what I was trying to address, that if you put in a solution and it creates an adverse flooding someplace else, you either need to mitigate that effect or adjust your project to some degree. Now, sometimes we move water into an area and flood an area and it's fine because it's to be flooded. It's a detention storage or something. So I don't want to be but I won't call that flooding. So I don't want to be generic in the response, but the idea is for any solution we provide, part of the analysis we do is an assessment of its impact on the areas that that project affects. And if it's an adverse impact, we have to figure out how to mitigate that or demonstrate that it's de minimis or not significant, or consistent with maybe the restoration goals for that area. So I hope that addresses it sufficiently.
Yeah, and to add to that, what Akin said, it depends on the structure location, and obviously, in the case of the current projects we are looking at, so S29, we are not seeing a lot of impact downstream of the structure, but our S27 will see some impact. So our modeling teams are working on that and seeing what kind of impact we are looking at, and if we need to make some improvement downstream of the structures also, we need to do that. So that is the product that's going to come out of the design process.
Thank you both. We're now going to transition out of the question and answer session and back to our presentations. Thank you everyone so far who's contributed. We have one more question and answer session, so if your questions have not been addressed yet, there will be one more chance. And with that, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Schaefer, the Director of Clean Energy Solutions at Florida Power and Light.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can I just get a quick sound check?
We hear you loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you to the district for inviting me to present today. We've had a long-standing relationship, and we look forward to extending that relationship with some new pilots as part of our Clean Energy Solutions platform. If we're going to go to the first slide, we'll get started. We have recently introduced a new program for commercial customers like the district who are looking to bring solar onto their property in a meaningful way to help meet their resiliency and renewable goals. Next slide. This new program is about bringing a sustainable future that all of us can enjoy, and it goes beyond just the generation of clean, renewable energy on site. It's about making a statement about your sustainability and your resiliency. And we'll talk a little bit about what kinds of assets we can offer through this program. Next slide. The program is designed to offer the customer the opportunity to do a variety of different designs to meet their needs on property. So if you have a large parking area, as seen here, you can do parking canopies. If you have a lot of roof space, we can design a roof system. If you have a lot of available ground space, we have ground options. And then we have some more decorative designs, including solar trees and solar furniture. Again, depending on what your goals are, the program is designed to sort of customize the solution to meet your energy goals. Next slide. The program is called Solar Vantage, and we believe it's an easy and convenient way to bring solar to your business. It's designed using a service model with no upfront capital cost. So what we do is FPL will design, permit, interconnect, build, maintain this asset, and in exchange, we amortize that cost over a 10-year period, and the customer partner pays that on their bill over the 10-year time frame. All of the services are provided by FPL, our qualified vendors, and our certified contractors. So you're getting the advantage of our expertise, our vendors that have been qualified and checked to be able to do this type of work to meet the highest standards that we hold them to. It also allows, as you bring generation onto your property, it allows you to offset a portion of your energy with this on-site generation. So we're going to interconnect to your meter, and when the sun is shining and that asset is producing, your meter is turning backwards, and you're earning what we call net metering benefits that reduce your kilowatt hour usage. In the event that you produce more than you're actually consuming, that energy can be sold back to us at the ongoing retail rate, and that all is in compliance with the state's net metering rules. Additionally, the larger assets may be eligible for renewable energy certificates. A renewable energy certificate is equivalent to 1 megawatt hour of generation from a renewable source. So these credits, these certifications, allow you, the recipient, to make those claims that a portion of your electricity is coming from a certified renewable source. And this is really important if you have established goals and targets. These are some of the audit things that need to be in place. Showcases your commitment to a clean, renewable energy future. And we do find that these are things that businesses have told us that attract, retain, and inspire employees and stakeholders. This particular example is a canopy at the Imaginarium in Fort Myers, and you can see it's a very strong visual display of their commitment. Next slide, please. So how the program works, our experts with our contractors and our suppliers design a solution that's right for you. So we work in partnership. What are the properties that you have? Where are you interested in having this solar, and how much solar is appropriate for the application? We're going to design that for you. We will permit, install it, own it, and operate it for the 10-year term of the contract. You will pay the amortized 10-year cost of that, so it spreads the cost out over time, and you're receiving those benefits over time. It's billed right on your energy bill, so it's easy to see and track and follow. And it allows you really to enjoy those benefits of solar on your property, pushing you towards your sustainability and renewable energy goals. And in this instance, helping the district achieve their resiliency goals, which I think is also very important. Next slide. So the types of assets that we're looking at kind of fall into two categories: meter integrated options, which are the larger canopy assets, and some smaller assets like solar trees and solar furniture. They come in a variety of different designs and colors. Again, it's about what is the application, where do you, and how much electricity, solar electricity, are you looking to produce. It allows you to decrease your carbon footprint, adds value to your workspaces, and because we own it and operate it, you are free from any of the maintenance obligations. So that's that grouping of assets. Next page, please. As we discussed earlier, we can also do roof and ground mount installations. This particular photograph is of a fairly large roof-mounted parking garage in California, but that same application can be converted to the ground if you have ground space. These rooftop installations and ground mount installations are usually a little more cost effective than the larger canopies and solar trees. And so, you know, that partnership of working together and trying to understand what your needs are and what the application is really important. And next slide. And the final grouping are this category we call furniture. We typically do not integrate these to your meter. They're sort of standalone producers of electricity stored in a battery. They provide outdoor workspaces. If your campus is large and you have a need, you have a bus loop and you have a need for you know, bus stop coverage, they all include integrated chargers and some lighting options. The only thing I would say about these is that they are standalone. You're not going to get a lot of electricity generated from these, but they do enhance your outdoor spaces and make them more enjoyable for your patrons. The lighting that is included here is powered by the battery. So if you have multiple days of cloudy weather, you know, you can't depend on that lighting for any type of safety lighting. So we just have to be cognizant of that through the design. And there are, I'm showing two here where there are a variety of different options. A vendor just came out with a newer style that we're excited to bring to market as well. So a lot of options here in color and look and feel. And I think there's maybe one more slide, a couple more slides, I guess. So just to wrap up the program in general, Solar Vantage is a product that is available for commercial customers such as the district. It allows you to partner with FPL to generate renewable carbon-free energy on site, demonstrate your commitment to that sustainable future. It's customized to your application, and it's really, we believe, a hassle-free way to go solar while you get to focus on your core business, which is managing water, and we can focus on helping your you know, how you manage your electricity and what how you use your property to incorporate that into your business. And so we've been working with the district on a few conceptual projects, and I think that's the last slide if you want to advance us forward. One more. Nope, we didn't get it. Okay, so there are three projects that we are considering. I'll just talk to them. One is at the headquarter building in West Palm Beach. That would be for parking canopy. We think we can cover something like 600 parking places and bring some generation to that space and get a dual use out of that parking space. And then two other options are the C43 and the C44 pumping stations. There is some ground nearby that can be used to host some ground-mounted solar, like you see in this on this thank you slide, and that would that could add up to I guess it's 2 megawatts at each site, so a total of 4 megawatts. And we're working through kind of the early design and conceptual for these, so that we can continue to look at what it would cost and what benefits would come from this generation. So that's all I had to present today. I'll turn it back to the district to go into, I think, the next question and answer.
Actually, it's going to me. I'm Dr. Cassandra Armstrong. I am a section administrator in the Applied Sciences Bureau. And I'm going to be talking to you today about our current restoration projects that we have going on and how they relate to resiliency. The district has been doing restoration for about 40 years now in earnest. And at the time that these projects were developed and dreamed of, resiliency was not the focus. But actually, the end goals are very similar to resiliency and how they contribute to it. So I'm going to walk you through some of the projects that we currently have and how they feed back into resiliency. Most of our projects operate under some type of a program one of the biggest programs that relates to restoration is our SERP program, Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. It was authorized by Congress in 2000 to restore, preserve, and protect the South Florida ecosystem while providing for other water-related needs to the region, such as water supply and flood protection. It's a federal and state partnership funded 50% by the U.S. Army Corps and 50% by the state. And at this point, we, the state, have spent over $2 billion on restoration under this program. Another really important program we have is called Restoration Strategies, and it's focused on our stormwater treatment areas, or STAs. The current program is designed to create 6,500 additional acres of stormwater treatment, as well as 116,000 acre feet of additional freshwater storage in flow equalization basins, or FEBs. And lastly, there is a science plan that is designed to improve phosphorus reduction performance within the existing STAs. Another program that we have that is very popular is our public-private partnerships. And within that, there are a couple of different types of programs. One is the Northern Everglades Pay for Environmental Services projects, and these are constructed for storing water. Collectively, these cost-effective projects have been providing 6,700 acre feet of water retention in local ranches in the Northern Everglades. There's also something called water farms. We currently have 3 water farms that are in pilot stage in the St. Lucie estuary, and they're designed to store water on fallow citrus groves. And lastly, we have something called cooperative projects. For example, Nicodemus Slough is one. It has 16,000 acres of wetlands in western Glades County that takes lake water when the lake is high and then moves it through a system of cascading basins and provides storage for 35,000 acre feet. Now, you guys have been hearing some really technical presentations today, and I'm sure that it's 11:30, you're ready for lunch. So I'm going to change up the tone a little bit. And I'm not going to give you a big technical presentation, but instead I'm going to go into the science of it at a very high level and tell you the why and the how of why all of these projects are important. You've heard all of the meat of how they're put together, the blueprints, the modeling, and now I'm going to tell you why all of that is important. So first we're going to start with the estuaries. And hopefully most of you know that estuaries are where the saltwater and the freshwater meet. And because of that, a gradient is formed. So for example, in the Caloosahatchee, the freshwater comes in here, so it comes in here at S79 from the watershed and moves downstream to Shell Point. And that is where it meets the marine water. And what that does is it creates a gradient of salinity. You can see over here at the different locations, like Fort Myers, salinity is at 4, Cape Coral, it's at 12. And as you move down, the salinity gradually creeps up. And this is important that this gradient exists within the estuary because certain organisms within the estuary depend on a particular what we call salinity envelope. And if it's outside of that envelope, then they get stressed or damaged. And there are a couple of key organisms in estuaries that are important for resiliency. One of them is the oyster. And they prefer their salinity to be between 10 and 25. So we want to keep the salinity envelope of 10 to 25 over the location of where the oysters actually exist, which tends to be down in this lower range of the estuary. On the opposite side, there's Vallisneria or tape grass, and it actually is a freshwater SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation, that actually can tolerate some salinity. So up to 10, it's fine. But when it gets over 10 to 15, it kind of starts shutting down. It goes into survival mode, it stops reproducing, it stops growing, and at 15, it gets killed. So why do we care about oysters in SAV? Well, oysters form reefs. And these reefs are very important. As you can see from the larger picture, on the one side of the reef, there's a lot of wave action that's going on. There's a lot of energy in that water. And on the other side of the reef, it's nice and flat and calm. So what oyster reefs do is they dissipate the energy that's coming from the marine side and slow it down, which what that does is it provides storm protection, it provides erosion protection, and it helps keeping that area stabilized. Those shells sit on the subsurface, and they keep the sediment right there instead of moving around. They also provide water quality benefit when they filter the water while they're trying to eat. That water gets cleaner and cleaner the more that they filter it. And lastly, they actually provide habitat for other organisms. So they're incredibly important to the function of the estuary, as well as important to the restoration or the resiliency of that area. Next is the submerged aquatic vegetation. So SAV in the upper estuary, which is the picture on the far left, showing you tape grass. It can be very dense part of the estuary, and it's also a food source for manatees. They love to munch on this type of grass. And it provides the same type of services that the oysters do. It breaks up the wave energy. It stabilizes the sediment. It's habitat for other creatures. Same goes for the seagrass at the lower end. You can see on the one picture on the right, there's a lot of fish in there. The water's pretty clear. And so these two types of grasses, even though they're at the completely different opposites of the salinity gradient, provide the same service of habitat, substrate stabilization, and energy dissipation of any waves, thus protecting the shoreline and protecting it from erosion. And it has been mentioned already several times as saltwater intrusion. What happens is when there is no fresh water to push the salt back out, the salt water will come up into an otherwise normally fresher type system and completely change it. What you see on the left is the Loxahatchee River. It's a wild and scenic river. It's really beautiful, and it's dominated by bald cypress up at its more fresher end. It's beautiful up there. At the bottom of it is mangroves. Well, what's going to happen if we don't have enough fresh water going into that system is those mangroves are going to start migrating upstream into habitat that is currently bald cypress. And as that goes through what we call a state change, that system is going to be very, very vulnerable to storm damage and things of that nature. So if those trees are already salt stressed and a hurricane comes along, you've wiped out your entire canopy, and now you've got exposed soil, and it's going to be really vulnerable to erosion. And so we really want to make sure that we have enough fresh water to keep that, what we call an ecotone, fresh as possible, so that you can maintain the vegetation that should be in that location. Now, we have some other phenomenon going on in the southern part of our system where we have what's called peat collapse. And what's happening is the marine water from Florida Bay and Biscayne Bay is coming in through the groundwater, going underneath the mangrove zone and up into the seagrass zone, the sawgrass zone. And the sawgrass is a freshwater plant. So when the salt gets on the sawgrass's roots, it starts to die. It doesn't add any more vegetation and biomass to the soil. The soil starts to collapse. We get peat collapse, and you get these little holes, little potholes behind the mangroves. And what that does is it kind of opens up an avenue, a canal, so to speak, where once these holes start interconnecting, well, now you've got a highway for the salt water to come busting right into the Everglades. And so we really don't want that. So pushing fresh water further south helps mediate that intrusion of the salt water. And this can be done with sheet flow. So sheet flow is what happens when you let water flow over a flat surface unobstructed. It just spreads out, looks like a sheet, flows downhill. And that's the way that we want the water to flow through most wetlands. But at the lower end of the Everglades, because of some harder instructions like the old Tamiami Trail, we had what were called restricted flow, where the water had to flow through a certain point within the hard structure. And that disrupted the natural flow, creating some areas that were too dry because they weren't getting enough water, and some areas that were too wet because they're getting all the water. It's not a good situation. So we've gotten some projects that have helped improve the sheet flow, both in the Biscayne Bay area, as well as Picayune Strand and south of Tamiami Trail. But improving the sheet flow helps with the health and improvement of Everglades. The pictures that are on the left-hand side are from Biscayne Bay, and that's a project that they were working on trying to increase the sheet flow there. And we actually have some good results from that. The picture in the top is the old Biscayne Bay Cutler wetland. It is a scrubby wetland. It's full of exotic plants. It just wasn't functioning very well. It wasn't getting enough fresh water. After quite a few years of restoration activity, we get the bottom picture where we've got a nice, healthy native plant species in the wetland. And there's lots of water in there. As you notice, the three scientists don't have any feet. They're up to their knees. So we've got lots of good water in there, and we've got the vegetation that we wanted to see in there. So this is a really good success project. So what happens when you don't get enough water to your wetland? Well, you get what's called peat oxidation. So what happens is the areas that aren't getting enough water, they dry out. The plants die, and you get these exposed areas where the peat is right at the surface. And what happens is the oxygen can get into that surface very easily, and that accelerates decomposition, and that's where you get your peat collapse. Another way to oxidize peat is to burn it. So when you've got really dry conditions, a lightning strike will spark off a wildfire. And if you don't have water sitting on that marsh, that peat's going to burn, and it's going to take you years and maybe decades for that area to recover. And as I described earlier, you can also get peat oxidation through saltwater intrusion. What happens with that, to get into a little detail, is when you've got water sitting on or in your soil, that oxygen cannot get in there. So it's going to use a different type of mechanism, the microbes will, to decompose. And when it's fresh water and saturated conditions, you get what's called methanogenesis, or methane production. It is super slow. It takes forever. And so you get peat accumulation because the decay is so slow, but the biomass addition is faster. And so you get that. But what happens when the salt water moves in, salt water has what's called sulfur. The microbes use the sulfur in what they call sulfate reduction. That's a faster process than the methanogenesis. And so decomp has sped up. And that's why you get, and that's why you get those potholes back behind the mangrove system. Conversely, when you've got all that water on there and everything's functioning correctly, you get peat accumulation. The vegetation are adding biomass, both from the surface and from below with their roots of the captured carbon. And you can get pretty substantial peat accumulation within your wetland. The picture on the right is a core from Water Conservation Area 2A. And I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's a transition zone about 20 centimeters down the soil core. And so the top to the 20 centimeter is the recently accreted peat. And you can see at the very, very top, you can still kind of identify some of the plant particles, some of the leaves, you can still see them. But as you move down the soil core, it just turns into dark mess, undecipherable vegetation material. But this can give you an idea of how quickly that peat can accumulate. And this is a very important process for maintaining what's called the marsh platform. Ooh, what's happening here? And building elevation on the marsh platform, which is very important when you're fighting sea level rise. One of the other things that we are focusing on is improving water quality. And we have built a lot of STAs around the district. And most of them, or all of them, are designed for moving phosphorus. That is our main nutrient of concern. The STAs take the water in at the top. They hit emergent vegetation, which tends to be cattail dominated. Particles fall out of the water, settle on the sediment. The cattail will take up the nutrients through their roots and put it into their above ground biomass. The water then continues to move through the STA into more of an open area where we've got submerged aquatic vegetation, where there's periphyte dominance on the vegetation. More nutrients, both dissolved and particulate, can get taken up. There's also a chemical reaction that causes phosphorus to precipitate out. And so the end result of all of this is that at the end of the flow path, the concentration of phosphorus is much, much lower than it was when it first came in. And so we've designed all of these STAs to help maximize the efficiency of that phosphorus removal process. Now, these STAs are huge. These two pictures show you the scale. This is one corner of one STA. I don't know if you could see it in the background. You can see the tall FPL power towers, and they're teeny in these pictures, so teeny, I don't know if you can even see them, but that gives you a sense of scale. One of the things that I did is I added up all of our acreage that we will have by 2025 at the end of restoration strategies, which is 63,500 acre feet. That is almost 100 square miles of STA, which is bigger than the city of Knoxville, almost the size of Tallahassee. That's how many STAs we have just on the southern side. We have STAs all over the place. Those are just on the southern side. So we are not playing around in the scale of these projects. And what you can also see from this picture is the two different types of cells that we have. The emergent cell, which is the one that's primarily dominated by cattail, is on the left. You can see it, you don't see any open water very much. The one on the right is our what we call our mixed marsh cells. They are a combination of the emergent and then that SAV. It's a lot of open water. It's completely different. It's more of a polishing cell, but you can see the scale of both of them on these pictures. And here's an example of how well they work. So the inflow concentration is in that yellowy pink, orangey pink color. The outflow concentration is in the blue. And the dots are the percent removal. And you can see, regardless of the amount of concentration of phosphorus coming in, almost all of them remove 75% of that phosphorus, or at least they did in water year 2020, which is an average year. That was pretty much consistent with other years, a 75%. Sometimes we've even had success rates up to 90. But that's a pretty impressive efficiency for removing that phosphorus. Why do we care about that? When you have too much phosphorus in a phosphorus-limited ecosystem, it completely changes the system. And so what happens in the Everglades is it goes from this beautiful ridge and slough picture that's on the right, where the sawgrass is your ridge and that open water is the slough, and you've got lots of bird usage, you've got lots of plant diversity, you have a very happy, well-functioning system, and you turn it into cattail. Cattail is great for sawgrass, not great for the Everglades. I mean, cattail is great for STAs, not great for the Everglades. You totally lose your habitat, you completely change the system. It's just not a well-functioning ecosystem at this point. So in order to save the Everglades, we need to reduce the phosphorus. It's also true for the estuaries. When you have too much nutrients in those systems, in this case, both phosphorus and nitrogen, you can get some really nasty things happening. We get algal blooms. Sometimes they're toxic and harmful to the organisms in and around the estuaries. And these can cause some serious ecological problems. One of the problems is that you kill off all your seagrass. they can't photosynthesize. There's a blanket cover over top of it. All the algae in the water is blocking the sunlight, and your seagrass cannot photosynthesize. So you lose your seagrass, therefore you lose your ability to fight storm surge and all of the other functions I mentioned earlier regarding seagrass ecosystem services. Another project that was briefly mentioned by Dave is this thing called thin layer placement. And what that is taking dredged material and putting it out onto the marsh platform to help raise the elevation. So what happens here is that sea level has come in, the level has increased, the plants start getting stressed. They're flooded more frequently than they prefer to be, and they start to die. And then you get shoreline erosion. So by placing additional sediment on the marsh platform surface, you raise the elevation just enough to get those plants back in the zone where they're happy and healthy, and they can start accumulating peat and start doing their own building of the marsh platform. So we're about to engage in one of these projects down near Biscayne Bay. This project that you can see on the right is down just south of Biscayne Bay. There's Route 1 is bordering the more southern end of it, and Card Sound Road is the road that's running through the middle of that picture. And what I'm about to show you is a helicopter flight that was recently took to identify some potential sites for this thin layer placement that we're going to do. The two sites that were chosen are the S197 pocket site and the Charlie site. So I will show those to you. Let's see. What you can start to see is that there's a lot of open water, a lot of open area where the vegetation really should be and isn't. There should be a lot of mangrove plants. You can see a little bit of that, but one of the things you can see on the right is those holes that I was telling you about where the peat has started to collapse. You can see that the vegetation is fairly thin and sparse, which makes it pretty vulnerable to erosion and sea level rise and sea level intrusion. So that's one of the reasons why these sites were picked as potential pilot sites for the thin layer placement. Here you can really see where the marshes started to break up. And here where the water is really starting to come in, you can see that a lot of the marsh platform is almost completely gone. So this will be one of the sites where they're going to do the thin layer placement, and the next site should be coming up shortly. Maybe. And here's the other site, the Charlie site. Again, a lot of open water, a lot of area that could really use some additional elevation to help with the mangrove repopulation of the area. And that will help fight with the sea level rise. So now to get in some very specific projects that we have been working on that contribute both to freshwater flow as well as water quality. In the St. Lucie watershed, we have the C44 reservoir and STA. The reservoir is not quite done. It'll probably be done later this year, where we can start operation. The STA is complete, and we're in what's called the startup phase, where we're letting the vegetation grow in. We've taken all of the samples to make sure that everything is fine as far as mercury and things of that nature, and that one's getting ready to operate as designed. So this will provide freshwater flow to the St. Lucie in the manner and timing that it wants, the quantity and the timing, as well as improved water quality, which will help both the oysters and the seagrass in that estuary, which will help with the resiliency. In addition, we also have the Scott Water Farm that's in the St. Lucie watershed that will store water and again, release it when the timing is ready. And then we are also in the process of creating additional reservoir in STA, the C23, C24 project, which is a little further north of the C44, and it'll again store and improve water quality for the St. Lucie. On the other side, we have the C43 reservoir that's in the process of being constructed for the Caloosahatchee. And it will provide a lot of storage to help time out the fresh water going to that estuary. And it's designed to help with what's called minimum flows and levels, and basically store the water during the wet season, release it during the dry season, so that we can keep that salinity gradient that I mentioned earlier in the right locations for the oysters and the seagrass. In addition, there's also further upstream a project where we're building an FEB. It's on the BOMA property, and that's 18,000 acres of land that will be turned into an FEB. And embedded within that is going to be what we call the water quality treatment testing project. And they are test cells that we will be using to look at nitrogen and seeing if we can build an STA specifically for nitrogen removal. The picture below was phase one of that project, where we did a bunch of mesocosms to determine what level of nitrogen removal we could get from different types of vegetation and different soils. All fingers point to it's a go. Hopefully the test cells will further demonstrate that this is a viable project and we can efficiently remove nitrogen from the water. And the reason that this is so amazingly and fantastic is if we can build a nitrogen-based STA, it'll be the first one in the world. Back over to the East Coast, this is the Loxahatchee. It is a wild and scenic river, and we have a SERP project that is looking at Loxahatchee River restoration. It's in the planning stages at the moment, but it is designed to provide more fresh water to the Loxahatchee in order to keep the bald cypress ecosystem where it is and keep it healthy and keep the mangroves down at the more marine end. Restoration strategies projects, we've got a lot of construction projects as part of that to build out more STAs and FEBs south of the lake. We've completed quite a few. We've completed the One West expansion. We've completed the construction of the A1 FEB, and we still have the One West expansion 2 to go. And then there's a 139 FEB, but lots of projects going on there to improve the water quality going into the Everglades. We also have a new reservoir going in as part of that complex, the EAA reservoir. I'm sure you're familiar with it. There's also an STA associated with it that will store more water to send south and increase the water quality as we do so. Another project is the Broward County Water Preserve Areas. And that is designed to keep more of that fresh water in the Everglades and to keep it from seeping out. Just a few more. We've got Picayune Strand in the Western Everglades. Picayune Strand was supposed to be a housing development that never happened, but all the roads were built and the canals were put in for drainage. Well, what we need to do is turn that back into its natural state, increase the sheet flow. So a lot of the canals have been filled in. The roads have been removed. We're getting close to being completed on some of the projects here. But we're returning it back to its natural state, which is really important, one, for the Florida panther, it's their habitat, and also all that sheet flow is going to go down to the 10,000 island estuaries, and oyster monitoring is one of our key criteria for success for that project. So again, going back to that resiliency issue of increasing sheet flow will increase resiliency. And last, we have our BBCER and BBCW projects for Biscayne Bay and also for Florida Bay, increasing freshwater flow and sheet flow to these wetlands and estuaries will help protect the coastline and all the townships that are immediately behind these wetlands. When those wetlands are well functioning, they're accumulating peat, they're increasing their elevation. So as sea level rise, they'll rise with it. And all of the townships that are behind it will be protected from storm surge and things of that nature. And with that, I'd just like to conclude that while these projects were not necessarily thought to be resiliency projects, they definitely are providing that service to the district, and we've had some really good successes, and I'm sure we will continue to do so, especially as we start to design more projects with resiliency specifically in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. That was fantastic. We'll now go to a brief question and answer session. We are way behind schedule, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. If we can't get to your question, please send us an email at resiliency at sfwmd.org.gov. Sorry. Okay, the first question. Is FPL actively trying to achieve net zero carbon emissions and reduce greenhouse gas emissions? Resiliency efforts are not sustainable if FPL, the grid, does not switch to 100% renewable energy.
Thank you for whomever asked this question, because I'm really pleased to get to tell you that today our executive team at FPL announced its Real Zero goal that would eliminate carbon emissions from our power plant fleet by no later than 2045. What's important to understand about this goal is that this is real carbon emissions, eliminating emissions. This is not a net zero goal that depends on offsets, and we have a plan to achieve this goal. And that goal includes some interim goals. I'm not going to read all of them to you, but I think there is one that is very important, which is a 52% decarbonization of our fleet by 2030, which is just 8 years away. You can read more about this exciting announcement at our website, www.nexteraenergy.com/real0. And to the South Florida Water Management team, I'll put that in the direct chat, and you guys can put that out as you feel necessary. But this is an exciting time for our organization because the question is very pertinent. We can't get there if we're not all working together, and we have a plan to be able to get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. The next question is, for the Little River Gate/pump, has the design been modified at all to reflect the high number of manatees that live in that area? What will be done to limit the impacts to them? And just a quick anecdote, I used to kayak to that pump station, and I've fed manatees right exactly where this question is talking about. So I'd like to know the answer too.
All right, so it's a good question, and as I said, this is one of the key element we are looking into the design of the pump station facility. When we design a pump station, we design them in a way that the manatees cannot enter the pump station, because obviously you know what will happen if that happens. So they are designed, so we have something called trash racks. These are very small openings, so manatees cannot go through them. As far as the structure, because we had mentioned in the beginning that the way we are going to be making the improvement to the structure is that we want to make sure that manatees are able to cross through the structure the way they are doing right now. So we are not going to be putting any kind of a trash barrier or anything else. in the existing structures. So the manatees are going to be able to move back and forth the way they are doing right now.
Thank you, Vijay. The next question. Are there any plans to request new developments / land use codes to store more rainwater and repurpose gray water in order to maximize aquifer withdrawals and stormwater runoff?
Thank you for the question. And yes, this is part of what we are looking in terms of alternatives. So when we look about flood protection, flood reduction, we are accounting for strategies that would allow us to store water in available lands. And again, if we get to have a formal recommendation that those areas will be providing benefits, and those projects are included among our priority projects, we'll be working in collaboration with the local governments to advance those types of solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question. Given that additional pumping seems inevitable, are you making plans to address mitigating the increased greenhouse gases?
Yes, this is part of the coordination that we are doing right now with FPNL to understand how we can offset those energy demands. Two locations that are right now included in our project are areas available at the C44 and C43 sites. Those are project considerations that we are looking at, discussing with FPNL, understanding how much we can offset, and through the net metering option, we are going to be looking at reducing gas emissions, of course.
Thank you. The next question. Have there been any studies regarding the use of SAVs as breakwaters? It was mentioned that they do mitigate waves, but I'm curious about whether or not this is an added benefit of adding SAVs to a project's design, or if SAVs could be considered a primary option for breakwaters.
The district has not specifically done any studies using SAV as a breakwater. However, in the Indian River Lagoon, we have a lot of really good lush vegetation areas that could be used for that kind of a study, and I'll definitely add it to our list of considerations.
Thank you. If number 5372 could unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
Crystal clear.
This is Drew Martin with the Sierra Club again. So I have a question about the stormwater treatment areas and how resilient they are during hurricanes, and if you could pump more water more quickly through them during hurricanes, and also what's the progress on decompartmentalization so that sheet flow could move from directly from Lake Okeechobee all the way down to the Everglades National Park.
So Drew, I'm going to make you ask the question again, if you don't mind. Just one quickly. I know there are two parts to it. I'm going to address both.
Okay, the first part of my question was, how do you make the storm treatment areas, the STAs, more resilient during hurricanes? Because as we know, after a hurricane, storm treatment areas go offline. And then my follow-up question is, how do we decompartmentalize the system so that we could return to the original historical sheet flow that moved from the Lake Okeechobee all the way to Everglades National Park? So those are my questions. Do you understand?
I do, yeah. And if you don't mind, I'll take the second one first, because I think I have a better answer for that one. So one of the components of SERP is decomp, the decompartmentalization of the water conservation areas. I think as part of the look, though, there are a number of things that have to be factored in. One, there has been change in topography in the earlier parts, the part around the EAA is more of a bowl. So just decompartmentalizing wouldn't necessarily result in flow. I think it's going to be important to get the water to an appropriate location before having the canals filled in or the opportunity to do mass sheet flow. What the district's doing, and I'm going to mention a project that I think Fred Skly is probably a better person to talk about, is there's a real true world scale model that's happening in the area between water conservation area 3A and B that's looking at exactly at how water will flow when you turn it loose. A lot of the theoretical, what you expect to see isn't necessarily what you will ultimately get. And so that decomp physical model is our effort to see how would it happen. They're actually building features to put water on the ground and seeing exactly how it moves. So that's what's going on right now. And I think before we try to do additional areas, I think we want to see what we learn from that decomp physical model. For more on that, I think you might need to get in touch with some of our science folks, especially Dr. Sklar. Now, regarding the STA question, you want to take?
So regarding the STAs, if I understand your question correctly, you were thinking that we should remove the cell structure within the STAs in order to increase sheet flow. Is that correct?
His time was up, so you can continue to answer.
Okay, I'm going to assume that was the correct interpretation of your question. The reason that we do not want to do that is these are designed wetlands specifically for improving water quality, and we need to keep certain conditions in certain locations. The emergent versus the mixed marsh, we really need to create that type of environment in order to get the most efficient phosphorus removal out of that system. And so we don't want to move that into a sheet flow, which is more of a natural wetland condition. We don't want that in the STAs because we need to maximize the efficiency of the phosphorus removal and create the appropriate conditions for that. However, once the water leaves those STAs, that's where you want the sheet flow because that's where the water is starting to flow into the more natural Everglades marshes. But from a project perspective, we need to keep those cells for maximum efficiency.
Thank you, Cassandra. And with that, we'll go to the final question. Paul Gray, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you. This is Paul Gray from Audubon, Florida. I wanted to thank Cassandra for her presentation. I know that a lot of this focuses on sea level rise, and in order to deal with sea level rise, you have to go down to the edge of the sea to work on it. But a lot of the flooding problems do come from watersheds and from the interior. And, you know, I work on Lake Okeechobee and I live up here in the Kissimmee Valley. So I'm very aware that when our water goes south and hits receiving water bodies, once it hits them in large quantities and poor nutrient profiles, it's already too late. You know, you can't do anything about it at that point. And so in order to try to head off a lot of those problems, you have to go up and work in the watershed. And so that focus on these watershed projects are part of our resilience, even if it's up in the Kissimmee Valley. And slide number 72 had a map of the Water Management District, and it has the Kissimmee Chain of Lakes region, which is 1 million acres, bright red. And we haven't even talked about why it's bright red. I realize you guys can't cover everything at once, but, you know, I think it's because of volatile weather and, you know, Orlando's facing water shortages. And since Orlando's at the top of the hill, the water flows away from them when it lands. And so they're going to have a lot of challenges. So anyway, I appreciate that focus on watersheds and what we need to do in the interior to try to make real structural resiliency for the whole water management district. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And I appreciate your comment about the Kissimmee. I realized that I did not provide focus on that particular system, primarily from a time constraint. But the district has spent a lot of time and money restoring the Kissimmee River back from a straight channel when the Corps first got a hold of it, and now putting the meanders back in and increasing the floodplain, providing greater habitat, greater flood control, and greater water quality improvement. So yeah, I apologize for not including that major and massive important project in my presentation. It was purely a time issue. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. With that note on time, I will pass it off to Yvette, and thank you everyone who's participated and asked the wonderful questions. I know that the conversation was wonderful, and I think our presenters enjoyed all of the questions, so thank you. Yvette?
Hey, thank you. I have a comment for Akeen. For your C8, C9 study, the control of nutrient loads from these canals to the North Biscayne Bay is a major waste quality objective for the operation of the coastal structures. Working with your local partners to control direct discharges of stormwater runoff into the canals is the key element.
Yeah. Well, it's just a public comment, so up to you. Yeah.
And I do not have any hands raised.
Any additional public comments here in the audience?
I do have a hand raised. I believe it's Drew Martin.
Yes, this is now the public comment period.
Yes, we are.
Yes, I just want to say in the public comment that first, I really appreciate all the work that the staff at the Water Management District is doing, and really impressive work and very timely. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you allowing the public to ask questions. I think public input's very important. Just a couple of things I want to say as a public comment. One is that I think that what I was mentioning about the STAs is just that during hurricanes, they tend to be put out of action because of the wind and flooding. And I was just kind of saying that, is there a way to make them more resilient so that, we don't lose the use of the STAs when we have these huge, storm events, hurricanes with high wind speed. But, you don't need to answer that question, but I certainly hope that's something you will be looking at. I understand the importance of STAs, and I'm not asking that you not have STAs to remove phosphorus and nitrogen. I think, and I'm really excited about your nitrogen removal. I also want to say that I think that ultimately the Everglades ecosystem is going to play a tremendous role, and that water will eventually need to go more to the center of the system, and rather than the focus of pushing water out to the coast. And that would hopefully alleviate some of the issues that you're seeing in the very south end of the system, and particularly the loss of, peat, because you're not getting enough water down there, and also issues that we've seen in Florida Bay with seagrass die-off. So again, thank you. Excellent presentation. Really appreciate all the work you're doing.
Thanks, Drew. I did want to answer your question on the STA resiliency. I appreciate that clarification. So we actually have been doing some things to make them more resilient to storm, because they do get damaged. We found, especially in the open cells, that the wind just picks up whatever vegetation is there and just rolls it over and moves it off to the side, and we have to basically replant the whole thing. So the reason that I called it a mixed marsh cell instead of an SAV cell is because what we've learned is that if we put in windbreaks with cattail around, then that will keep the wind damage down to a minimum and prevent the vegetation from getting ripped up. So we are looking at the resiliency of how to keep that performance during storms. And the other thing is the water storage and the FEBs that keeps the STAs from getting flooded out. and then we can send the water in a more metered way after the storm has passed. So we definitely are looking at ways to improve the resiliency of those STAs, because when they do get knocked offline, it's very expensive to repair.
Thank you.
For those who would like to comment, please raise your hand. I have one, Juliana Isabel Navarro.
Hi, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand. Sorry about that.
It's okay, thank you. I have no additional hands raised. With no additional hands, I will pass the mic to Dr. Moran.
Great. I have just a few more announcements here just to close this event. First, thanks everyone who attended. We had an excellent participation, on more time in the workshop, steady participation through the entire morning. So we really appreciate the time that you spent with us this morning, and really we'll be looking forward receiving the comments that we are hoping we'll be submitting next. And I think this image here just summarizes what we have been discussing. We touch all the points. We touch water resources in general, protection of water resources, protection of our water supplies, ecosystem restoration efforts, our flood protection, and we all understand this is a piece. Those are pieces of one system. We discuss all those strategies that we need to be able to advance in our system as well. And again, those will be happening at the multiple levels. We are working very closely with the counties, local governments, the partners at the state and federal level, with the regional climate compact initiatives and others, to really look at how we integrate those local, regional, natural, inland drainage, coastal impacts, all of that in our resiliency strategies. So we will depend on coordination and collaboration. We need to touch funding. I had a question earlier today about that. So we have a plan, we have all those actions, and we are pursuing funding through, of course, existing funding at the state level. So Resilient Florida is one of that pockets. We are looking very closely on the opportunities to advance projects through this program. Last year, we had over almost $700 million available to support resiliency efforts, local communities. We have new funding available right now in 2022-23, at least $320 million available for resiliency projects. So we are working very closely with this opportunity. In parallel, we are working also at the federal level. I mentioned the CNSF flood resiliency study that will be initiated later in the fall this year. This is an opportunity for us to work in partnership with the federal level as well to implement a few of those projects. So we're going to be really advancing this study to look at the flood resiliency components of the CNSF system as a targeted, focused approach now. And we are also collaborating with the Army Corps to expand this into a comprehensive study, again, looking at the resiliency aspects of this system and having the ability to advance a few more of the analysis. We are also working with other potential state and federal funding opportunities. So working with at FEMA, we mentioned our BRIC funding applications, other hazard mitigation applications. We have additional programs at the Army Corps. So the Target 16 study, CNSF Flood Resiliency Section 2016 study is one. We also have some other opportunities to work with the Army Corps. We are collaborating with the USGS and NOAA as well. There is funding available at the Department of Economic Opportunity that we are looking at, and also FDEM. So again, mapping opportunities to leverage funding that we have here throughout Bellarmine and implement those projects. So here, I'm opening the plan and those projects for comments. We are The draft document is available already in our website. Here is a link. We're going to be spreading this out, the word out, so we can get comments. We mentioned that we got about 30 agencies submitting comments last year for us. We are going to be following up with each of you to show you where we are and how we address those comments in this year plan. We had significant input, and we also were able to bring a lot to this new plan version, to this 2022 update, thankfully to your participation, to your comments, to you spending your time sending us those contributions, and we really appreciate that. So please share additional comments through Resiliency at southfloridawatermanagementdistrict.gov. We're giving a month, so July 15 is the deadline there for us to receive those comments, and we will be again following up to anybody who submit questions or comments to us through this process. One important announcement that we have reserved for today too, I hope we are there and with the energy to be engaging with us for a few more minutes here, but we are launching today our District Resiliency Public Forum. So we are going to be coordinating very closely with the local governments. We're going to be inviting our partners to sit down with us in a recurrent format to discuss those questions, to get continuous feedback, to engage in conversations, and to really learn and understand how we can be addressing those needs for our regions here in South Florida. So we are inviting resiliency leads from the 16 county local governments. We also want to get the 298 districts involved. We understand they have a central role in determining how we want to be advancing improvements in the system. So yes, all the water control districts as well. Planning councils, we are having very a lot of conversations with planning councils on those topics, and we invite them to join us. Of course, the tribes, state agencies, we have the Florida Hub and the State Chief Resiliency Officer also now engaging more and more with us on those questions, and we are hoping to get their attention as well and participation through the forum. And also federal agencies that we coordinate very closely. We have here meeting dates that were set up already. We are excited, really reserving the dates in the calendar. Our first kickoff meeting is scheduled for September this year, September 28th. And so wait to receive the invitations, and please consider joining us. Here is just a statement about this initiative, the goals. So we are really promoting collaboration among the districts, local governments, water control districts, and in those important water management initiatives that are related to resiliency. We are really committed to promoting regional collaboration, partnership opportunities, really holding proactive discussions, leveraging technical knowledge. We have a lot of technical knowledge and information available there that we need to leverage. And we are proposing this as a fact-finding forum, engaging partners in assessing those changing climate conditions, what are the water management implications, understanding that water will be central in us in fixing and really promoting resiliency in our region. So we are hoping to foster a constructive environment here to discuss really like tangible asset solutions and really support decision-making on water and climate resiliency actions. So with that, I will leave just our link here to subscribe to our resiliency updates, and really thanks everyone for participating, and really looking forward to seeing you all at the upcoming forum discussions. Thank you.